Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into my channel. I am Tristan Gabriel, and today I have a very, very special guest with me. This is Derek Lambert, the myth, the legend, the host of Mythvision podcast. Derek, I am so glad that you're here. I have expressed many times in the preterist community your influence, your impact on my life personally, and where you're at in the history of humanity. You have brought the mythical aspect of the New Testament, all of the top leading critical scholars to the biggest platform that humanity has ever seen. So I am 100% honored. I'm privileged to have this discussion with you. Derek, I just want a organic, live discussion. There are people who have questions, there are people who need clarity, and I can't think of no other person who has the experience within full preterism,
Yeah.
within critical scholarship, within seeing the mythicism, that genre within the New Testament, which is absolutely life changing. So thank you, Derek, for coming on to my channel. Let's go ahead and let's have this discussion.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce? I know I just introduced you, but would you like to go ahead and just kind of have the floor and
I
kind of
think
take away?
well, I think it's important right now. Thank you for making me omniscient and omnibenevolent and omnipotent just now. Okay. I really appreciate that because if I make any failures here, it's not me. It's clearly the interpreter who's watching the video. Duh. I could never be wrong. No. Um, I think it's important that we set the frame. And the frame is we don't have a time machine. All we can do is use the tools, the best methods, like the best we can to go back, look at the material, and try to decipher what seems to be the case. And I must lay out the like up front, we're dependent on material that has been done by experts. We're dependent on translations. We're dependent on linguists. We're dependent on historians, mythologists. There's so much academic material that we're dependent on before we lead into this discussion, because without that awareness, that humble approach of maybe I don't have all the answers, if you come into this, I've got to figure it out. My theological position is the correct one. No. It's full preterism. No. It's futurism, and it must be this because of this. Or we might even discuss Israel only to some extent, because that's kind of a spinoff that comes out of full preterism. And, I've delved into that for quite a while. If you think you have all of it figured out and you have a systematized way in knowing what it is, I think that's a failure right off the bat for any system.
Yes.
I say that because we're dealing with a collection of material that was not written by a single person. And it was not intended to be unified as a single narrative by any individual human. You have to bring a spiritual baggage by assuming the Bible interprets the Bible, which where does the Bible tell you that the Bible interprets the Bible, right? And once you have that framework, you can then become the decipher detective and decode everything and figure out the meaning of all this stuff. And when you do that, without actually trying to fact check or hear critical positions and investigate in a way that might falsify your own position, you're already starting off with the wrong mindset, in my opinion. And you've already shot yourself in the foot before you started walking. That's my opinion.
Absolutely. Even in the Proverbs, it says a wise man loves correction and reproof. And I always go into a dialogue looking, where am I wrong? Where can I learn? And if both parties, both opposing views can go into a dialogue trying to find a solution, trying to, kind of let ego down or even their mission, whatever it is, their motives, to
Right.
try to find just a clear, unbiased conclusion. And I think that you've done a phenomenal job on that. Let's talk about full preterism. I already see
Sure.
people in the chat. We have a lady here named Jackie says, what exactly is preterism? Some are saying it already happened, the end times. It looks like, Derek, that full preterism is kind of on the rise. We see Don Preston, he debated Michael Brown. Obviously, you've given him this historical platform to debate Mark Smith, and now Richard Carrier. And so
Yeah.
where do we see full preterism going? I mean, it's impacted both of our lives. Where do you see it going? I mean, where is it at now? Where do you see it going? And of course, what are their critiques of full preterism, and why essentially full preterism is erroneous. Why is it wrong?
So again, I should have added, we're not going to cover a ton of stuff that can be discussed, right?
Yeah,
First thing we need to do is define what is preterism and what we mean by that, because the term probably has a broader spectrum of meaning in antiquity,
yeah,
and throughout history. But we're specifically talking about theologically within Christianity, and it's the idea that prophecy, it's already something that has happened in the past. It's been fulfilled back here. So it's the idea that we're dealing with something that's already occurred. It's already become fulfilled, if you will, back in the past. And there are partial preterists, which means they think a lot of the prophecy that was predicted in the New Testament, especially around the synoptic apocalypse, where it talks about this generation will not pass away. Well, they see it, okay?
yeah,
We almost like have to back up for the viewer who may not know what we're talking about. I know most of this is inside baseball language,
yeah,
where you're telling people what, and we all know what this is. Well, hold on. We got to explain to someone who might be tuning in. Jesus in the Gospels talks about something that's supposed to happen very soon, the end of something. Something's supposed to occur. Now, whether he actually said it, critical scholars have question marks. Did he say that? He might have said this. He might not
yeah,
have said that. Like, they have their notice, and they don't agree on all of the pedantic details. Sometimes they overlap and agree, and they have their reasons. Sometimes they don't. Did Jesus say the end is supposed to happen soon? Well, now you got to ask, what is the end and what was supposed to happen? These are the questions.
yeah,
Partial preterist, which is an orthodox position, which is acceptable among Christianity in the broader sense today, it's not heretical, believes that there is going to be a future resurrection. There's going to be an end to the problem of evil. It will get resolved. And this is a problem that I think is intuitive, and I understand. Okay, I get why futurism makes a lot of sense from a human experience level, man. You look around at
yeah,
all the evil in the world. This is supposed to get better. At some point, evil should end, right? Not evil has ended, and then we're watching the atrocities of evil constantly happen, or finding ways to make it make sense within our full preterist theology while we watch every bad thing I could list without YouTube trying to demonetize the video,
yeah,
that humans are doing in the behaviors, right? So partial preterists say, actually, some of that stuff Jesus said back here, this generation will not pass away. These are the signs. You'll see these signs, wars and famines and rumors of wars, etc. The armies surrounding, depending on which gospel that gets specific about this. That all happened. Partial preterists agree that stuff was talking about the war in 70 AD. Full preterists just go on a whole nother level. Okay.
yeah, they do.
They just take it to a whole nother level, and they say, there's no room. There's no room for any expectation beyond when Jesus is describing these events to happen and the end. And they're
Yeah,
right. Okay. They're
yeah,
right. This is the problem, bro.
yeah,
They are freaking correct that this stuff was supposed to happen, whatever this stuff means back then.
yep,
And I think where we're going to see the problem is this cognitive dissonance. This is the key, bro.
yeah,
Cognitive dissonance is the key to explaining futurism, to explaining preterism, metaphor language for everything. No more tears,
everything.
no more suffering, no more death, no more darkness, no more. Everything becomes a metaphor. And
Yeah,
this is something that N.T. Wright dabbles with, the theologian, New Testament scholar, for those who don't know. Everything kind of becomes metaphorical. And a critique was written, a review of his book. It's like 1,500-page book. Paula Fredrickson wrote in her critique of reviewing the book, in a section, she says, is it really metaphors all the way down? Is the
wow.
day before the day of the Lord and the day after the day of the Lord the same? Like,
Yeah,
there's what? Nothing happened? What about the
yeah,
archons? And then she mentions the daemons. She mentions all the Greek words that Paul uses describing principalities and powers, dark spiritual beings that are
yeah,
demonic forces that he actually believes will be defeated by Christ, and their
yeah,
influence on the world, the real world. Now she
Yeah.
hits him in the throat like jugular punch from a female. Like, I mean, it felt like Muhammad Ali just, pow, stung like a butterfly. And I'm like, wow, she's hitting something very important, because I think Wright sees it. He sees the problem.
Yeah.
His solution is metaphor. Oh, well, we could find metaphorical language in the Hebrew scriptures. We've heard this said over and over. And
Oh,
there
yes.
is. There
Yes.
is. So this is the problem we're facing, is Jesus said some stuff. Okay. Futurists like to make what he said about near, soon, about to, all these things, like the time is at hand, the night is far spent, the day is upon us, like it's about to happen. They go, that's kind of metaphorical. Or they go, it didn't mean like quickly, like it's soon, like it meant quickly, as in like, let me give you an example. If you order pizza, right, you might expect the pizza to come soon. But the way I phrase the sentence, if I phrase it in a way that says, when the pizza comes, it's going to come fast, quickly. Now that just tells you the immediacy of how fast the pizza might move, but not
Right.
when the
Right.
pizza might come to your house.
Right.
They try to interpret those words, futurists, and go, Jesus isn't saying like right around the corner, like next month or next year, like that soon. He's saying when he decides he's going to come, he's going to freaking fly and he's going to make it happen so fast. That's how
Yeah.
they interpret it.
I interpret it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and those time statements and audience relevance, those two principles, full preterism does a great job for Christians to at least honor those time statements, to answer the critics like Bertrand Russell, who say that
Right.
it's a failed prophecy. Why? Because of the expectancy factor. They all expected it, Derek. They were doing radical behaviors. They were selling their possessions. Paul was telling them, don't get married because the time is short. I mean, you see, even historically, Christians doing radical things. Bertrand Russell brought this up. I mean, I like to bring up Bertrand Russell, Derek, because he's a hallmark. He's a
Yeah.
legend in Western philosophy. I mean, even though he was an agnostic, he's been attributed to atheistic literature. And he always will be. I mean, Christopher Hitchens drew upon him. And I believe that
Yeah.
it's every Christian's job to answer the skeptics. I mean, even the Bible says, have an apologetic, have a defense, right? So what do? Just like how you said, it's cognitive dissonance. They have to spiritualize the language. Everything becomes a metaphor. And this is where I have brought up, Derek, the experiential factor. How did the Christians all throughout the world experience the
Yeah.
resurrection, the change to immortality, the meeting with Christ in the air with the dead? And the only mental image that the full preterist scholars have given us, well, I understand there are different versions, right? But the covenant full preterist, the only mental image is the destruction of Jerusalem when the Roman soldiers entered in and tortured men, women, and children. Even Josephus gave an account of women, cooking their children. I mean, this is a terrible event.
Yeah.
So, how did the saints all throughout the world experience this? And I think that experiential factor is key. How did they experience it cognitively in their mind? What is the mental image? And we know that it didn't happen. There's
Yeah.
no historical evidence of any type of physical resurrection. There's no historical evidence, Derek, of any type of metaphorical resurrection, whatever that may be, and Christians talking about it, right? And in Don Preston's debate with Richard Carrier, I think Richard Carrier did a really good job explaining, kind of like these errors. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying is absolutely correct. They want to cram everything into 70 AD, and this is where, and it's not just the Israel only preterists who believe that it was all for the first century, but even those who have Don Preston has debated, they have also come to that conclusion to say, hey, look, if you're saying that it was all fulfilled in 70 AD, then that means that Christianity essentially ended in 70 AD.
Right.
And this is where I think that full preterists fall on their own weight, because they want to continue to have some sort of residue, a futurist residue that continues after. But to me, and I think you brought up the problem of evil, that one is crucial to me. How can we say that this is the new heavens and the new earth,
Right.
metaphorically speaking, and yet you have evil, which is sin, essentially sin, existing and perpetuating all throughout the human race? That's supposedly tied to Adam's curse. Adam eats a piece of fruit, introduces sin, evil into the world, but yet it's going to continue. I just think that these problems are very crucial, and
When
I
does
think
the
that
in when does the
correct?
reinterpretation of sin occur, where now sin is no longer what you actually do that commits these atrocities, right? Because if
Yeah,
you're full preterist and you realize that the new heavens and new earth is now that they have interpreted it that way, which this goes into this is the problem with this interview, is that we're not going to be able to cover everything, but like
yeah.
I remember Don preaching, and we're going to have a debate, by the way, that's coming, where you and Don, I'm going to be moderating. And dude, I love Don. Okay, so some of the viewers may not like Don or whatever, I don't care. I mean, he's to me, he's like a good old gentleman to me, and he's a faithful believer, and he's arguing his case. He's doing what he believes is right, and you
Yeah,
can't knock someone. I don't
I like
personally
him.
have any. Yeah, I get, everyone has their own, but he used to preach talking about how heaven and earth was just covenantal language,
Mhm.
not cosmology, not actual location where this stuff means something cosmological. It meant a covenant. That's it. Because
Yeah.
Moses speaks to the people of Israel. It says something like this in the Torah. Give, O ear, heavens, and listen, O earth, right? Heavens and
Mhm.
earth. And they equate that to just mean the Israelites, that the people of
Yeah.
God, those are the covenant people. We have some really fascinating fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls that indicate in Deuteronomy 32. It's mentioning the table of nations, where there is Yahweh, who's one of those who inherited Israel among 70 sons of Elyon. Elyon being the chief father of Yahweh, which this gets into an interesting rabbit hole of finding out that Yahweh was not the chief daddy, dad Mac, if you will, Mac daddy, however you want to call it. He
Mhm.
had a dad who gave him an inheritance of Israel. So this allotted land was only given to Yahweh, and there's 70 other nations with 70 other gods, sons of
Mhm.
God, B'nai Elohim, that rule those nations. This is the divine council that we see throughout Psalms. We see this in Genesis 1. Some call this henotheism, but it ends up becoming where Yahweh's the chief God. He's always been El all along, and they conflate the two. In that section, later, you find a discussion where it's actually talking to heaven, where the gods are, and the earth, where humans dwell. So you have the mortal realm and the immortal realm, where gods are. So when Moses speaks, he's not using covenant terms and just go heaven and earth, meaning you Israelites. He's saying, listen, O heaven, to the gods above. He's
Mhm.
not talking to people. He's
Yeah.
talking to gods above. When you break this stuff down and you go down to its original
Ah,
context, our foundational definitions we use in full preterism, this baseball talk that we have, you have to
yeah.
go back and rework all the things we were taught over the years of absorbing this doctrine. Because the reason we came to this position, someone might go, this sounds absurd. Why would you believe Jesus came back in 70 AD? When you're a Christian and Jesus is Lord, he is God in the flesh, depending on your theology, mostly Orthodox position here. He can't be wrong. He
Right.
cannot know things according to the text in his fleshly form, using the idea that he has a fully human and fully divine aspect. But in his human form, he cannot know things, but he can't be wrong.
Right.
So when he makes these predictions, we're Christians. It's like asking a Muslim, do you think Muhammad was wrong when he said da 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 da? You think they're going to, yeah. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Yeah, he was wrong about that. No, he
No.
can't be wrong.
Right.
So we have to interpret him that makes sense when he makes clear language that things are supposed to happen soon.
Yeah.
So I know I went down to heaven and earth, but I needed to mention that.
No, no, I think that's great. I think it's great because they wanna tie that into, like, some sort of metaphoric language that was symbolizing Israel.
Yes.
I've even heard the temple that it was talking about, the a temple-centric type paradigm. Well, let me ask you, the change to immortality in the twinkling of an eye, critical scholars believe that that was a literal change to immortality. How
Right.
do you how do you spiritualize this? How do you make that a metaphor? I mean, all throughout Christian church history, I mean, people have interpreted it that way. And then the meeting with Christ in the air, that spiritual realm where the principalities and powers and rulers of darkness, that they were supposed to meet him in there, and it was together with the dead that was in Hades.
Mm-hmm.
So that right there, the resurrection, even William Lane Craig, we all know he's a famous evangelical apologist. He had stated about full preterism, Derek, that the resurrection is the Achilles heel to full preterism. Well, when I look at the meeting with Christ in the air with the dead, the full preterists say, well, the dead ones that were in Hades, they were taken up into heaven in
Mm.
70 AD. But the living saints, they got left behind in a sense. And what happened to them? Can we comment and discuss the change in mortality in all of your studies, in your interviews with critical scholars, even with former Christian scholars, whatever? The change in mortality in twinkling of an eye, the meeting with Christ in the air with the dead. What is the nature of that? What did the saints expect that to be?
Well, when you say the saints, I mean, again, there's going to be different voices. Let me share my screen. I'll show you something. I actually pulled this up. I think this is relevant to this discussion. All right, all right, I'm sharing it now. Let me know if you get that pulled up. All right, so let me see. Where are we at? So this is the Dead Sea Scrolls, fully translated. Brought up. Nope, those aren't them. This. Where's the Gospel of Thomas? The Gospel of Thomas somewhere in here. Trying to find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay, this is in the Gospel of Thomas, which is, M. David Litwa understands this text to be a Gnostic text. There are a particular group of Christians who believe through gnosis you receive salvation or immortality. It is not through pistis, faith. It is through gnosis, knowledge, but an inner knowing, an inner knowledge. This is what the disciples say. You asked about the saints, right? Well, I think we need to know what the followers of Jesus, according to these texts, say.
Yeah.
His disciples said to him, this time on Jesus, when will the repose of the dead come about? The resurrection. And when will the new world come?
Wow.
He said to them, what you look forward to has already come, but you do not recognize it. This is Gnosticism. This is a form of Gnostic teaching. This is not orthodoxy. This did not win out the day. This is not what you get in your Eastern Orthodox Catholicism or any Protestant versions that we find. This is the very thing that I've watched over the past few years, Don Preston kind of squirm against. What happened to the body of Christ when he went to heaven? Well, he discarded his body. No. Orthodox people say there is a hypostatic union, 100% God, 100% man forever and ever. Jesus in his flesh in heaven somewhere. And he's also 100% God at the same time. But my point is like, this is a realized eschatology. You get hints of this kind of teaching in the Gospel of John, where it talks about Mary and Martha, right? Lazarus just died. I don't have all these texts. I'm going to stop sharing so we can actually talk. Lazarus just died, right? And they all wept. And they go, Lord, when the resurrection comes, it'll all be better. You know, that kind of idea. And Jesus goes, Mary, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoa. You just redefined. Notice something. This is why I feel bad. This is very difficult, bro, because full preterism can find their teaching in the Bible. And I'm not just talking about the time statements. I'm talking about realized eschatology. But does that mean the entire Bible is teaching the same idea? They say it is. They make sure Revelation clicks with Mark, clicks with Paul, clicks with, they systematize, right? But in the book of John, it's realized, like we just read, in a way, maybe not as intense, but it's there in the Gospel of John. It's got that Gnostic tone to it. The resurrection, Jesus is the resurrection. There's no future resurrection, but in other books there is.
Yes.
And the way that Paul describes resurrection is that they will be bodily raised, but with a immortal body.
Yes.
Something akin to light. So when you're looking at Paul's analogies in 1 Corinthians 15, they discard the shell. He uses a seed analogy. You plant the seed in the ground, but what comes out isn't the seed. It's something radically transformed, like a cocoon with butterfly kind of thing. But he uses seed. There is a body, but it's it's pneumatic. It's spiritual, but it's not that it's not some kind of material.
Yeah.
It's invisible, but there's also this light sense to it, because he talks about there's There's flesh of the stars, there's flesh of
Yeah.
fish, there's flesh of this, but then there's this new body. And he's dealing with an audience, scholars say, whoever the Corinthians are, or whoever this letter seems to be writing to, if it's authentic. These are all questions that scholars, even today, are questioning and challenging. The audience is not accepting this idea that there's a bodily resurrection. They don't like this notion, it seems. And Paul has to break it to them. If Christ be not raised, then we are in our sins. And that's the whole gospel. There's nothing left. If he did not raise from the dead.
Right. It's in vain.
Yeah. And to raise is to stand up. So there's a bodily of some sort, even if it's transformed, resurrection in Paul about Jesus. And then he describes the saints. Now, why would we say Jesus rose from the dead? Like full preterists agree, he actually rose from the dead. And then say, but the saints don't get the same resurrection. And it's using the same language. This is why futurism has its power here, because it's like, nah, we know the Lord rose, and we're supposed to, in like manner, like Christ, follow. He's the first fruit, and we are the following fruit after that in this agricultural language about resurrection. He's just the first one to do it. We're going to do it like he did it. So unless they want to go all the way and become Gnostic and say, Jesus actually didn't rise in an actual body, you can even become so Gnostic that you might find the Basilidian tradition, which is an early 2nd century group, very early. They said Jesus didn't even get crucified. Wow. They resolved the problem, and they said, actually, someone in his stead got crucified, and Jesus laughed, watching from a distance.
Oh, wow.
They thought they got me, but they didn't get me. And what's interesting about that is some speculate, scholars, that the Gospel of Mark, when it talks about Simon of Cyrene, you remember the story where he comes and helps Jesus?
Yeah.
What? Someone has to come and help carry your cross? So some think that's where that switch up could have been interpreted, and that Simon was actually crucified instead of Jesus. So I mean, look, this is fun speculation.
Sure.
But it always made me kind of go, hold on, you do think Jesus literally rose in his body, his flesh resurrected in some sense, right? Or maybe not in Mark, it doesn't imply it's his flesh. There's a transformation that absolutely takes place, but there's no appearances. And it ends in Mark 16:8, where the women told no one, for they were afraid. Matthew picks up the tradition, fixes it. Someone added a longer ending to Mark. Then Luke and John are the ones who actually emphasize the physicality of the body of Jesus. They accept that because it's part of their canon. Sure. We inherited it. But you get to this strange conundrum that, like, why aren't the saints also going to be in respective order? They're just after Christ in the same way, resurrected. Why is that not obvious? It seems.
Yeah. And I like to say different authors with different minds, with different motives in different times. I think that, all of Christianity, they're looking at the text like it's inspired by the Holy Spirit. God is in the background, just organizing the canon. And there's essentially one author with one mind, one story, so to speak, but it's not that way. And I think you've done a phenomenal job, bringing on these critical scholars who have dedicated their entire lives with an unbiased approach, looking at the historicity of these texts. And I think that changes
everyone
the
has a
game
bias.
lot.
Everyone does have a bias, but they're using tools that, if you mean that they're not coming at it necessarily with a faith frame perspective.
A faith frame perspective, yeah.
Yeah, everybody has a bias. I just want to get that out of our language because, it's easy to go, oh, they have a bias, and as if we don't. I have bias. I have preferences. Things make sense to me a certain way, and we all do. Sorry to interrupt, but I feel like that's necessary that we do that.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, maybe I should say, an academic approach without using the Holy Spirit. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like what
right.
Christians will say, the Holy Spirit is this some sort of agent that organized the canon. And when they go so far as to say the Holy Spirit is helping your brain interpret the text, and yet you have 50,000 denominations who are all claiming the Holy Spirit. And I think that Don Preston does a phenomenal job. And he actually hooked me with that one, saying, you can't use the Holy Spirit to explain the time statements. You can't use the Holy Spirit to say, well, this is how you interpret the text. And so you have just these volumes of books. And does the Bible contradict itself? I mean, yes, I think it's safe to say that it absolutely does. But like you had stated before, in a worldview of a Christian, that just cannot happen. So
Well, it
I think
depends
that
on the
these,
Christian, right? I mean, clearly it
yeah,
depends
yeah,
on
yeah. Sure,
yeah.
sure. I mean, for the most part, Jesus can't lie. God can't be wrong. Like their brains won't even go there. This is why I think it's very important to take an academic, scholastic approach, looking at these things logically. And I think that a lot of critical scholars have done a phenomenal job. Can we talk about the meeting with Christ in the air with
Yeah.
the dead? I think that this is an Achilles heel to covenant full preterism. Now, there are full preterists out there. Don Preston has debated Ed Stevens, another voice in full preterism, who believes that there was a literal rapture
Yeah.
or a literal taking away. And I remember Bart Ehrman was stating that he doesn't believe in the rapture, that it was a literal meeting with Christ, apontesis is the Greek term, and then escorting him back down to the earth. Like, like how a king or the citizens would meet their king after a battle, and they would
Exactly.
escort them back down to victory. Now, Don Preston has used this in his literature. And my question has always been, well, then, how did the saints metaphorically or spiritually escort Christ without his body? He's not returning on a cumulus cloud as a 5'5" Jewish man, is what he likes to state. Christ was not supposed to return in his body, but he still believes that they were to meet something and escort him. So, can we get into the nature of the meeting with Christ in the air with the dead to forever be with the Lord? In all of your studies and your experience, how do we interpret this, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, your point about the imperial it's Roman imperial type language Paul seems to be using. He does this with adoption. He does this, I mean, everyone does this, by the way. This isn't to pick on Paul. We're talking Paul, right? We're dealing with Paul. Like every person, every rabbi, every human that lives in a cultural historical framework uses the language of the time. They use what is the common language of their world. I'm in America. I use certain lingo that you could tell, oh, he's American. You could tell by how he said this. You could tell by the language Paul's using, this is imperial. Now, what is ontologically expected to take place in Paul's mind, I do think is up for debate in terms of what is ultimately really supposed to be expected, because I don't know. There are a couple ways of looking at it. And there's this rapture idea, but the rapture has this idea that you just go.
Mhm.
Not that you're going to meet him and coming back. See, on earth as it is in heaven kind of idea. So if
Yeah,
you're saying he's visiting Christ in the air, and mind you, you have elsewhere in writings, even if Paul didn't write Ephesians, some debate, more conservative scholars think he did. More critical scholars think this Ephesian letter has way too much verbiage that isn't Pauline. It's post Pauline. It's within the school of Paul, or in the name of Paul, they wrote it, but someone else later. So they're developing his theology in some way. In Ephesians, who is the principality, the ruler, the god of the air? It's the devil. It's Satan.
yeah,
He's ruling the archons of this world. So the air is ruled by the evil ones. So Paul does have a spiritual world encompassed by
yeah,
demons and devils and archons and all of these different powers that be, and it's not just humans on earth. He does envision this world full of different powers. In the air is where Christ will come. He will be reigning. He will destroy the evil and all the evil powers, subduing them, subjecting them, and then rule on earth. It seems this is what Paul's idea, and this is a very Jewish idea, that God is going to rule on earth. Prophets talk about this in the Old Testament, that one day Israel will rule the world. The
yeah,
nations will come subject underneath Israel. So there's this idea that the saints themselves are going to meet God or the Lord in the air, and he's going to be coming back. In Roman imperial language, it was when an emperor would come to enter a city, you would go out to the gate, meet the emperor, and guide them into the city so that they would meet the throne, or to go to where they're supposed to be seated to be reigning over the city. And so this seems to be the implication of what Paul's saying. What does that mean as far as what was supposed to actually happen? I tend to go with the model I just described to you. Someone might try to paint some metaphor here. I don't see any reason,
Yeah.
especially when you see other places where Paul talks about women covering their heads.
Yeah.
And you go, well, why is he telling them to cover their heads? Get this. This is not even to be funny. This is like legit. He's worried that these demigod fallen angels will lust after the women because their beauty, that he wants them to cover their heads so they don't get taken over sexually by a fallen demonic angel. So if Paul believes in the fantastic world that I used to once believe as a Christian too, that spirits and demons are literally manifest everywhere in this world that we live in, he might be concerned reading his scripture and going, oh yeah, remember in Genesis chapter 6 when the sons of
Yeah.
God saw daughters of men and they were beautiful and took them? Well, he's saying cover your
Yeah.
heads, women, because these angels will subdue you and take you, and you don't want to attract them. So if he
I
has
got, I
that
got, I got,
belief, you see
I
what I'm
got to tell
saying?
you, Derek. I got to tell you that First Corinthians 11 passage. I was born and raised in the apostolic faith, where our women didn't cut their hair. And First
Mm.
Corinthians 11, it was always a debate. Did he mean a covering or a cutting of the hair? My mother, even to this day, her hair is, super long. And that First Corinthians 11 passage, even my bishop with the UPCI, he debates on that. It's hilarious. And yet there's all these different interpretations. I just wanted to throw that in there because
Yeah,
First Corinthians 11, that one hits home a lot. And every
all
time,
about it.
yeah. I mean, I have students that I teach at high school, and I could just, once I see them a mile away, oh look at their hairs, right at their ankles. Look, they're apostolic because they don't cut their hair. But that's amazing how that passage, that's a very unique interpretation of that passage, that spiritual demons and
Mhm.
angels in the transcendent world, the air, right,
Yeah,
where they were supposed to meet him there. I mean, there had to have been some sort of experience that happened to those living saints,
yeah,
and the covenant full preterists, there's no clarity on this, Derek. There really isn't. And that is essentially what made me start questioning this covenant eschatology, was that, like, okay, so then what in the world happened? There's no history of them experiencing anything. Why? Because it didn't happen. That's why futurism is correct. That's why Christians have been expecting this entire time, because nothing took place and there's no evidence. And I like, Derek, how you brought this up in the debate with Don and Richard Carrier. You said, is there one historical evidence of Christ returning in the first century in 70 AD? And there is none, and there's a reason for that.
yeah,
But I think that's very, very important. We do have some people in the chat that have questions. If you don't
yeah,
mind, maybe sometime later we can, somehow
yeah.
get them involved.
I will make
Uh,
sure I make time for any questions. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I like what you said there. Let me just say this. So I actually wrote something before I came to do this stream, just in case, in light of cognitive dissonance. So
Okay.
cognitive dissonance, the best way I could describe it in the simplest terms is like you have a worldview, you have a belief. I like to use the personal analogies of you have a girl, it's your fiance. Let's just say you have a lot invested, or wife and mother of your children, the whole nine. You built an entire life with. Your friend's like, bro, I was driving down the road the other day and your wife was like literally making out and on top of some dude in a car when I pulled up to the gas station. Now, I know from experience the heartache that can come from stuff like this.
Sure.
There is an immediate gut punch that can
Yeah.
happen when things like this occur. Okay. And what happens mentally is the more interesting phenomena, because part of you wants to not believe it. In fact,
Yeah.
if you're so invested, you may not believe your friend unless you have better evidence. You almost don't want to believe it. You'll be resistant to that evidence and will believe he's lying because he's trying to get you to break up with her or something and he wants to sleep with her, or who knows. I'm just making up an analogy.
Sure.
So cognitive dissonance happens when you have like a belief in something that is in your world that makes sense and there's no stress. I'll call it stress. There's no tension. It's easy to believe. Then you hit a wall. Something happens. Your girlfriend cheats on you. Your dog dies. Whatever it can be. Something crazy happens. You hit a wall. It can't be. Your brain finds a way to massage it to make it make sense so that your worldview doesn't crumble and your life doesn't fall apart.
Hmm.
So this has been This phenomena has been studied very deeply. There's a book called When Prophecy Fails, a UFO cult by Leon Festinger and others that participated. They went into the UFO cult in 1940s. They said the end is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
They had infiltrated the cult pretending to be members the night that the end was going to happen. And what was going to happen? All of the North American continent or the entire Americas was going to be flooded by blood. This was the belief.
Mm-hmm.
That night, midnight struck when the time was supposed to happen, and the lady who was in charge of the cult is sitting there in silence. 1 a.m. strikes. 2 a.m. strikes. It was supposed to happen at 12 p.m. At 12 a.m., midnight. 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And then the people, the members that are in silence around her are crying their eyes out. They're all like distraught, like this was supposed to happen. And then she gets a message 4 hours later. And they're a very secluded cult in the 40s. They then had this like reinforced belief, even more strength in their belief than they were before this happened. When it failed, she goes, they spoke to me because they believed they were going to be taken up by UFOs into outer space. Literally kind of like you remember the famous cyanide situation where the Heaven's Gate cult committed suicide, believing they were going into heaven. It's similar to this kind of weird cult belief. Well, they didn't get taken, and that's why they're crying in disappointment, but she got a message. And the UFO or the extraterrestrial said, listen, you've averted, you group caused salvation to the entire continent. If it weren't for you, I would have flooded them all. So the message was when they went to the media was, listen, because of your prayers and because of your being devout and faithful to the cult, you averted total annihilation of all the people on North America. And so they studied this phenomena to watch what happened when it didn't happen, how they reinterpreted their own thing. This happened with Sabbatai Zevi. Sabbatai Zevi was a famous Jewish cult leader that was proclaimed to be the Jewish Messiah by Jews all over in the 17th century. They believed the end was going to happen soon. He got captured, or he went to the Muslims, okay? And these are like powerful Muslims. They will use the sword, bro. And he approaches them, and they literally give him a choice. You convert right now to Islam, or you're dead. So he's a Muslim the next day, and he doesn't die. And his followers said, this is part of what was supposed to happen. This is part of the plan, that he converts, but he's not really a Muslim. So they start to reinterpret. And then other people in his group said, no, they don't accept that interpretation. They pushed it into a different interpretation. Okay, where am I going with this? Early Christians, same thing. The Millerite movement, the great disappointment that happened with the Millerite movement in 1844, I believe it was. The Jehovah's Witnesses in 1915, 1975. Dude, every time failed prophecy happens, the movement does not end.
It's more radical.
Strengthens.
Yeah, it strengthens.
Yes. So what happens when the kingdom of God hasn't come? It's in you. What happens when the resurrection doesn't come? He is the resurrection. Or it already happened. Hymenaeus and Philetus. And this is what's fascinating about the full preterist, because they look at that and they go, see, people did believe that the resurrection happened, but the graveyards aren't empty. That means some people believed a resurrection of the dead wasn't physical, Derek. Wasn't physical, Tristan.
Yeah.
Therefore, full preterism still on the table, baby. And I say to them, my friends, if you only understood Gnosticism a little bit more, then you would understand why these prevalent realized eschatologies and a little bit of cognitive dissonance, you have to understand why they would have come up with these kind of interpretations. But back to Paul for 1 second. He talks about these heavenly things in the air. Paul lives in a time of philosophy, bro. He's a Middle Platonist, and he has some Stoicism as well in his philosophical. You could see in his writings, this guy's acquainted with the philosophy of his day, and he's sharp.
Oh, sure.
Not a dummy. He talks about meeting, or he knew a man, most scholars say he's talking about himself, who went to the third heaven, okay, and saw things he can't utter. They're unlawful to even speak of, which means he didn't write them down. This is sacred. This is secret. Probably mysticism of some sort. There are 7 levels to heaven in most of the cosmology in the ancient world. And those levels of heaven have different various beings in them. If you don't know the demonology and the angelology in the background of understanding first century material, especially coming from groups like Paul's writings, you're not really going to get that it's not just the Romans on the ground. I'll give you a modern example, and I don't want to get political, but it's a necessary example. When the elections are coming, every 4 years we get this. Evangelicals come out of the woodwork and they point out the other side is demonic. They are the team Satan. The devil is on their side. The evil one. They're controlled by the wicked. And you go, well, I know them. I met them. They don't seem that. They seem like they think you guys are demonic, evil, the devil, Satan. Well, these in the background behind the human powers, they believed there were powers that pulled the strings, that that made the chess move about human. The fate of humans were oftentimes in the hands of the gods, the daemons that pulled the strings. So Jesus had to defeat them. And in reality, the expectation was to defeat the earthly powers as well. So we can get into the book of Revelation about that as well, where Rome, Mystery Babylon, which full preterist does not like to interpret as anything other than Jerusalem. I used to believe that too, but I wrote some stuff that again was in that vein of, crucially, none of the canonical writings flat out declare it's all done. We have Jesus say it is finished, but like on the cross before he dies, what's finished? He didn't resurrect yet. But then the other interesting comment I had is, in psychological terms, full preterism is an extreme attempt to eliminate the dissonance by declaring victory. We weren't wrong. The prophecies were fulfilled after all, just not in the material way expected. So nowhere in the New Testament, it is done. I would expect that they would roll out the gospel, which was likely written after 70, would have said something like, and these things did take place and it happened. Something past tense that says the prediction, occurred, being it's written after the fact. But they don't think it was written after the fact either.
Right. I mean, they believe that, Matthew through Revelation, that was all written before 70 AD. And I think that's absolutely erroneous. But what you have to say that if you're going to take this as a prophecy rather than written after the fact, trying to deify Christ to make him look like as if he had prophesied about the destruction of Jerusalem, right? I think that's also very important to adhere to these critical scholars who are looking at the datings of when these books are composed. But if you have that basic fundamental evangelical mindset of the New Testament being written by the Holy Spirit, it's just, to me, it's a defense mechanism that's immune from attack. It's like you said, Gnosticism, at its best, in my humble opinion. Let's talk about the differences of full preterism. There are differences of full preterism. You have the covenant full preterists, and then you have the full preterists who really believe that a rapture did take place. Well, let me ask you, if all those that were Christ at his coming, then comes the end, Christ was going to raise everyone up on the last day. Let's say if that did take place, then could we say that Christianity ended in 70 AD? That's where they fall on their own weight, is that conclusive argument, right? Like, if we're saying it was all fulfilled and there was a literal meeting with Christ, or a rapture, or disappearing of people up in the mountains somewhere, then how does that apply to us today? That is the common, anybody who comes to full preterism, that is the common logical conclusion, or at least you're going to entertain that. At least your brain is going to go there. Your mind is going to go, well, then what's for us today? If the change of mortality, the meaning of the Christ in the air, the resurrection took place in 70 AD, all of these constituent elements of eschatology took place, then what's for us today? How are we now included? Please give me your thoughts on that. Does it fall on their own weight? I mean, what do we say?
It's super odd to me. I had because you get so hyper focused on time statements and get persuaded of the position that it had to happen soon, because you're Christian, you end up believing that it happened soon. To me, I know this doesn't bother a lot of people, but no fathers, no Christian evidence at all shows awareness of this ultimate thing except the Gnostics. Okay. And even then, they're like, it's already happened, but in an inner sense, it's all just spiritual within, right? Which
Yeah.
is why I don't get why full preterists just don't adopt the fact that they are what they are. Okay,
Mm,
they're Gnostics in some form. Okay,
mm,
it's unfortunate that they have to squirm to make accommodations to the popular Orthodox position to
yeah.
make them happy, so they're persuaded. And I get it. Look, if you're selling a product and you know that the person's allergic to raspberries, you don't want to hint that raspberries are in the ingredients.
Right.
You want to give them, oh, this is strawberries, and it's what's your favorite fruit? Oh, it's that favorite fruit. That's what we have too. And so they're finding a way to make it accommodational to orthodoxy. So your point is, like, questions came to my mind immediately. Does that mean people are born immortal? And what
Mm,
does immortal even mean? If it just is a metaphor, and it has no eternal or actual immortality as people understood this in other mystery cults contemporaneous to Paul. They believed that oh, so it's philosophical. It's a mixture of philosophy, but Plato had this idea that the soul was immortal. Okay,
yeah.
you're talking it doesn't cease to exist, which is why hell, when the interpretations of hell come in, these places for people who are bad become a never-ending ordeal because of the philosophy and belief about the soul. So what does it mean to be immortal? And full preterist, they're going to have different probably interpretations of this. But when you're looking at the mystery cults, there is this idea that you're going to live on after you die. There is this ongoing immortality to one's
Yeah.
soul. And this is everyone: Dionysian, Orphic, the various Eleusinian, especially by the first century. And I'm sitting here asking myself, why is it that we want to reinterpret what immortality means in Paul when you have this like prevalent all over the place in the Greco-Roman world, the usage of this term, but you don't really get this in like old Hebrew scripture. You do get this in Second Temple literature once they're under the Hellenistic and the philosophical schools of thought like Plato and stuff. So to your question, or I don't really know what the answer would be to this for a full preterist. It's odd to me because the problem of evil is another problem. I don't
Yeah.
get it. Is it just
Yeah.
when you say I believe in Jesus, now you're immortal? Are you born immortal? Because the immortality took place back here. Is this like a ticket booth that when you come down to the altar, you receive it? And it's, but what? Where are the answers to these questions?
Yeah, Mike Sullivan, one of Don's constituents, he actually debated Michael Brown. And he had stated recently that there was an harpazo, a catching away in their hearts in 70
Mm,
AD. And Mark Smith, you hosted the debate with him and Don. Mark Smith commented on one of my YouTube clips, and he said that, well, there must have been much more than a little dancing in their souls. And I have to bring this up, Derek, because I think this is so important. And this was confirming to me. I sponsored the debate with Richard Carrier and Don because I really like Don, and I'm grateful for, advancing full preterism on this historical level. But Don has replaced this meeting with Christ with the dancing in the streets. I got to bring it up. And Mark Smith commented on that. You hosted this formal debate, and when he had heard that, we reached out. I had him on my podcast. Even Ed Stevens, who Don debated, another full preterist, and other full preterists, they heard that and they thought that we've never heard that before, but there must have been something internally, right? Just like what you had stated, like what happened internally. How are you now immortal? What intellectual virtues happened? And even Mark Smith stated there must have been much more than a little dancing in their souls. Mike Sullivan said that there was a harpazo, a rapture in their hearts. And I just think, then what is that? That has to be some sort of Gnostic implications. And if it is Gnostic implications, then what is it? What is the outward manifestations of that? And I think that corners this view of the resurrection. They can't explain the how factor. They could explain who, what, when, where, right? Who? The Christians. When? 70 AD.
yeah.
What? The resurrection. How? Well, we can't explain how. You have to believe it in the eyes of faith. I mean, So there's no explanation on the how factor. And I often use, like, if you're in a judiciary court, if you're on a jury, and a suspect is being accused of a crime, if you cannot articulate how this person, the suspect, committed the crime, then that's it. I mean, it's game over. You don't have any proof if you can't
Mhm.
explain how. So I believe that the majority of full preterist scholars fail to articulate the true nature of inspection and application of this. And I think that that is where it fails. And in my journey, Derek, full preterism led me right back in a circle to failed prophecy. I was convinced for a minute that we have a logical, reasonable answer to the critical scholars to say that it's a failed prophecy. But then once I started seeing the fallaciousness of this how factor, then I thought, failed prophecy, that is what I hang my hat on. That this
Yep.
prophecy failed. And it failed in the expectancy, but it's also failing morally and ethically. And I love how you bring up the existence of evil, because look, we can just see all throughout church history that look at what the Christians have had did to humanity, both Catholics and Protestants, evil still existing all throughout the human race, and full preterists are arguing that evil will continue throughout the human race. Why? Because the new heavens and the new earth is eternal. The gates in Revelation is eternal. What's
Well,
outside of the gates? Evil states of affairs. And therefore, they are arguing that evil will happen for all of eternity. And it's just starting to dawn on me in the last couple months that full preterism is indirectly advocating for the existence of evil being part of God's design. If God is real, that it's God's intelligent design that evil perpetuates all throughout the human race. And the majority of Christianity is going to reject that. And the majority of humanity is going to reject that for all generations. That's not a hopeful message. Hope deferred leaves a heart sick, right? That's what many full preterists like to use. That, hey, look, they were hoping that the resurrection would take place. They were hoping that the second coming would take place. If it didn't happen, then that means they'll concede and say it's a failed prophecy. But so then what's for us today? Oh, you have evil happening upon children for all
yeah.
generations. It's a terrible message. I had a formal debate on Standing for Truth podcast with Stacy Trubeville, a full preterist. He actually debated Dr. Kent Hovind, Dr. Dino. And I was, and even Dr. Dino was, getting at Stacy with this. And that existence of evil, Derek, that is one thing that always troubled me, even when I was a Christian. And then I try to become a full preterist all the way. And that right there, wait, so we mean to say that evil is going to exist for all eternity and your God is never going to stop this? That is a terrible message. It's not a hopeful message. So, what are your thoughts on this? I would like to get to some of the questions that people have in the chat,
Yeah.
but what are your thoughts on this? I mean, full preterism, the existence of evil, how
Yeah.
do they rectify that?
So cognitive dissonance. Is she cheating on me?
Yeah.
Nah, nah. She can't be cheating on me. So how is she not cheating on me? Jesus said he's coming back soon. Okay, he must have come back soon because he said he was. He can't be wrong. So when he did come back. How? Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm. In what manner? Right? In like manner.
In like
Oh,
manner.
okay, okay.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is.
yeah. So it might be worth just painting and I'm being funny for those who don't know, there's a book written by Don Preston in like manner that he deals with this topic, and he does this really strange thing. I think it's strange in terms of, I get why. I mean, he's finding a way out of the problem of Acts chapter 2 or 1, Acts 1.
Yeah.
Jesus ascends to heaven and the angels say to the disciples, he's going to come back in the same way he's, left. You just saw him leave. He's going to come back in the same way you saw him leave. This visible ascension will be seen by people. They're going to see him, and all eyes shall see him. And, Revelation chapter 1, verse 7, that every knee shall bow, and all eyes, even those who even those who pierced him. Anyway,
Yeah.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but you kind of have to go back and play the tape back to Daniel. So Daniel, critical scholars date this book to the 2nd century BCE because in the book of Daniel, there are predictions that happen historically that he gets just to write. Wait, if I start telling you something about 2025, bro, but I'm writing this, let's pretend I'm writing this in 1744 or something. But you get this text much later, 3,000 years from now, and it says 1655 or some really old date, but it's describing 2025. But it's describing 2025 to a T pretty damn well. Yeah. And then everything after a final prediction that's within it, like along the predictions, everything's right. And then everything after this one prediction is wrong. It's talking about Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who's a Ptolemaic leader in Alexandria, Egypt. And of course, he's dealing with Judea. And there's all sorts of problems that are going on historically in this text with him trying to come into the Jewish temple. History paints it this way. He got bullied by Romans that literally drew a circle around him and told him, make a decision. You better leave out of here now or Rome's going to crush your ass. Like, period. And so this is in the 160s, 170s BCE, 2nd century BCE. I'm just painting a little history because this leads up all the way to Jesus. You might go, why the hell does this even matter? Well, this matters because Christians interpret Daniel as pointing to Jesus. They think it's actually predicting the 490 years lands on Jesus. Yeah. But there's two major hypotheses that critical scholars use. One is the 586 BC hypothesis, which is that the 490 years of Daniel started back here when the destruction of Jerusalem took place by Babylon. And so they were moved into Babylon. Then the other is when King Cyrus defeats Babylon in 538 BCE, you end up getting this place where Cyrus tells the Jews, go rebuild your temple. So somewhere between the 586 and 538 BCE example, there is this promise that Israel, all Israel, will be saved. That's the 12 tribes. We're not just talking about Judeans here because they had lost them, according to the history, in Assyria under the captivity that they had there where they were dispersed among the nations. So there is this promise that the 12 tribes are supposed to come back. Jeremiah hints at this. The prophet Jeremiah hints at this, but he says it's 70 years. Daniel comes on and says that Gabriel in the book of Daniel says, well, you know how Daniel or Jeremiah said 70 years? It was actually 70 times 7. So it's 490 years. That's what really was being prophesied. So he's correcting an earlier date. And in Daniel, you get this strange passage where there's 3 dates given. 1,150 days, 1,290 days, and 1,335 days. So Daniel's talking about these 3 dates, and scholars like John Collins, who's milked this book for 40 years, and he knows the Aramaic, he knows the Hebrew, he knows the Greek, he knows all these languages inside and out. And he says, dude, they had a date of when they thought the end was going to happen. It didn't happen after 1,150 days. So then they had 1,290. Then they had 1,335 days. So they're like correcting the earlier prophetic dating. Yeah. So Daniel's saying the resurrection, which he interprets Ezekiel's dry bones literally, not metaphorically. So by the time you get into the Hellenistic period, the way that people interpret old scripture is not what the old scripture says. Yeah. If we do not get this, bro, I swear you just have fun. Interpret things however you want, do whatever you want because you're going to find whatever you want because you can do that. That's how interpretation works. But how do we know what these words mean? How do we know they meant literally? Well, you got to look at other Jewish writings. You look at the Qumran material where Daniel comes up. Daniel's the first earliest, if you will, apocalyptic literature in Second Temple Judaism, one of the most popular. And within a few decades after its writing, it's like prevalent among the Jews. This is an important book. That 490 years is supposed to land right there around Antiochus Epiphanes. They're living in the last 7 years. After those predictions, everything after that, how Antiochus is going to die, where he's going to die, all of these historical events fail. Daniel's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. I can't paint this any other way. However, Christians and later Jews, which, by the way, were Christians. Christianity was a Jewish religious system. They interpreted Daniel as talking about their time. Yeah. And they pushed it down. Yeah. Even Josephus is talking about how Daniel was actually prophesying these things. Oh, but the Jews had it wrong. They thought it was someone from their own tribe. Instead, it was talking about Vespasian. I say Daniel to say the can, when it failed, got kicked down the road. We even have this in some of the Qumran sect scrolls, fourth Habakkuk, or the Habakkuk Pesher by John J. Collins. He writes this in his book called The Apocalyptic Imagination, where they thought that Daniel's 490 years landed on them, which was in the 1st century BCE. So you have 2nd century Daniel, 1st century BCE, before Jesus. They thought it was going to happen then. Then you get like Mark Antony enters into the Holy of Holies. Dude, this is a pagan who comes and enters into the very high priest sanctuary where no one else is supposed to go. And the Jews are freaking out in a panic, thinking the end is going to happen. Mark Antony, 1st century BCE. Then we get this strange text from Paul in the 1st century, Common Era, after Jesus. And he talks about a man setting himself up as a god to be worshipped as a god in the temple. We've heard this, Thessalonians, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Many scholars think this is talking about the Roman Emperor Caligula, because Caligula actually tried to set up a statue of him and I think Zeus, Jupiter for the Romans, in the temple, the Jewish temple. Now, Jews were ready to die for it, and they thought the end must happen soon. This is sometime in the 50s of the Common Era. What does full preterists do? Oh, they make that fit 70. Then they go to the book of Revelation. They make that fit 70. Everything becomes a magnet. The black hole is 70 AD. Instead of going, maybe Paul thought it was going to end in the 50s. Maybe the book of Revelation is talking about it ending in the 90s, when we traditionally date this text, and it might be thinking the Roman Empire is going to get destroyed. And then you got to deal with the whole idea of Nero. And anyway, I all of this, like, bro, it's cognitive dissonance. The can gets kicked down the road, and the movement just reinterprets or moves the date further down the line.
Oh, and it's going to continue. It's going to continue.
Absolutely.
This is why Mythvision podcast is here for humanity, to deconvert everybody out of this cognitive dissonance. This is why you're kind of like a messiah figure, Derek. I mean, how does it
You're
feel?
tripping. No, I don't care that people believe. I had that kind of mission for a while. I really don't mind if it gives them, if it helps them better their lives. I'm more about what philosophy improves your life now, not so much about making everyone need to be exactly like me or try to be a skeptic like they can't believe something. But I do want you to be better educated. I think if we were better educated in knowing this, then harmful ideologies like the end is coming soon and people swindling you out of your money, or the fear of hell, or the fear of like doomsday expectations and all that, we should educate ourselves. But
I mean, I just saw an interview with Ted Cruz. You know, he ran for president years back. I think he was with Tucker, and they were talking about, does the Bible teach that we should support Israel? We know the war that's happening now. This is a religious driven war.
Right.
And you know, even like who you're going to vote for, you know, the future of our country and the future of the world. Religion plays a huge part, namely the Abrahamic religions.
Right.
And so this is very important. You know, I do see some questions in the chat.
Okay.
I have, but I would like to touch on some other topics I know we had discussed previously. But there was a man that I met. His name is Jacob Kilburn. He was actually a former UFC fighter. He was a full preterist. We met I had an Instagram page where I was debating, I was posting content when I was a Christian, and we met on there. And
Nice.
we talked behind closed doors. He's still a full preterist. He appeared on Mike Sullivan's podcast. Mike Sullivan is the one who debated Michael Brown. He's a friend of Don K. Preston. And he often states, what's the meaning of it all? You know, what's the pretty much truth? Like, why are we doing this? You know, and for me to answer that question is to simply better the future generations. That's it. That's my motive.
Yeah.
We could all potentially have a bias. If I have a bias, my bias is to simply help the future generation live a life of their dreams. Not squander it for a myth, essentially. And that's where I'm at, honestly. And throughout my journey, Derek, full preterism, and I've stated this on other podcasts, even in debates, and I mean it with all my heart, that full preterism led me out of the faith. If it wasn't for full preterism, I would still be stuck. in Christianity. Dispensationalists probably still be in ministry. But when full preterism was introduced to me and I saw the time statements and the expectancy like never before, it started making me question everything. I had to, you have to go
Yeah.
back to the drawing board. And once you see that filter, you can't unsee it, right? Once you see the expectancy, once you see the gravity of those time statements, you can't go back to it. And so, full preterism, just like you, Derek, it led me to, well, there has to be some sort of conclusiveness. This is where the Israel only preterists come in.
Mm.
And I would like to talk about this for a little bit
Yeah.
and critique it as well.
Okay.
But then it went right back to failed prophecy, that it was not fulfilled. And so that has been my journey, and that has been my motive. And I want to go ahead and give Jacob, he's a friend of mine, respects, because we talk about this all the time, and he's a sincere believer, sincere full preterist. And that's often the question, like, then what now then?
Yeah.
Now that religion is out of your life, what now? Well, I'll tell you, now you get to live the life not believing that you're cursed because Adam ate a piece of fruit a long time ago, not being fearful of an eternal hellfire that's going to take place. Even the full preterists use this. Like, it's like a freedom, it's a deliverance. There's power in fulfillment.
Yeah.
There's also power in abandoning this religious paradigm that literally controls your morals, your ethics, who you're going to marry, what job you're going to do, the amount of money you can make, the where you should put your money, foods you should eat, what you should wear, pretty much like your entire life in your reality. And we can see where even false religions, if you're a Christian, have a Christian worldview, then all the other religions are false. And that's exactly how, and even within Christianity, all this denomination is false, this denomination is false. And this incoherence, to me, Derek, it proves that religion is a product of human anthropology,
Oh,
that
for sure.
religion is man-made. And full preterism has helped me with that. And I'm grateful for the teaching of full preterism. But can we address and I understand that there are, in the audience who've never heard of the Israel only preterists. If I could
Yeah.
just give a brief synopsis, they
Yeah.
stemmed from Max King, who was the founder of Covenant Eschatology Full Preterism. He was the mentor of Don Preston. And the Israel only paradigm simply teaches that Christ only came for the Israelites in the first century. I know we can't cover everything, but when I was debating against full preterists, I would use that conclusive argument. I understand the Gentile argument; they believe that it was all Israelites that we're reading about in the New Testament.
Right.
But what I liked and I appreciated about the IO preterists was that there was a weapon that said, well, if Christ came and the resurrection took place, then Christianity ended and the Bible does not apply to your life anymore. And that is where I said, wow, can we touch on this? I mean, what is your intake on this? What's your approach?
Yeah. Well, I've gone through the critical scholarship for years, so that it makes my approach different. But after talking to you for quite a while, actually coming at this in a funny angle of how then, what did they experience? And I never really thought about that question as a full preterist for years. It was you and me hanging out on the phone, Tristan. I was like, listening to you explain the how and why that was such a gotcha or strange thing. I'm like, hold on, that's a really good point, because historically we have an actual temple's destruction. Full preterists say that is the judgment, or mainly most full preterists. I've heard Ed Stevens say something about after people die, they also like individually go before the judgment throne of God or something like this. But ultimately, the final judgment is 70 AD. And we saw it manifest in the real world. It had ontological implications, and we saw it.
Yeah.
Well, the flip side of judgment is reward. And Jesus in all these parables, the wheat and the chaff, the sheep and the goat, the good and the evil. There's the dark, the children of darkness, the children of light. Like, you get these flip coins. You can't have one side of the coin and not the other.
Not the other, right?
And so this is why I was like, hold on, Tristan, you're hitting something so important here. I made a few posts of this over the past year where I'm like, hold on, you mean 50% of the parousia took place? Because you got judgment. We can look at this. We can see historical evidence for this. We got nothing for the resurrection. We got nothing for the reward. What
Right.
is the reward? And that's where you're like dancing in the streets and all the funny stuff. Oh, they had a
Yeah.
placebo effect. I
Yeah.
had a warm, fuzzy feeling.
Yeah.
That's the resurrection, the award, like, is that you
Yeah.
felt happy inside while your family's murdered in the Jerusalem temple, which is why I
Yes.
liked, you mentioned, I didn't watch the interview yet, but in your last interview with, was it Daniel Rogers?
Daniel Rogers. Yep. Don's protege. Yeah.
I actually appreciated the answer you gave me that he said, I don't know that he said this, but you said that he said something like Jesus wept for
Yes, he said
Jerusalem,
that.
right?
Yeah.
That's a better, but here's the struggle even with that. I agree. That's a much better conclusion to recognize that what's happening in 70s just not something to be rejoicing over. But if
Right.
the rejoice is simultaneously weeping for what's going on with your family that is trapped in the Jerusalem temple, starving to death with cannibalism and all the war
Yeah.
and death and disease that's happening there, simultaneously you're getting rewarded with an internal, I don't know, immortality placebo or something.
Yep. Yep.
In your house you're dancing. I don't know, I'm being funny. Like, it doesn't make sense. But as this related to IO, we would have endless talks where I was talking about how over the years I just have been more and more persuaded that the Gentile argument is the huge conundrum for me.
Mhm.
And I know the arguments. I've listened to them for years, and it's interesting to think in a different way. Sometimes it's important to say this up front. It's important that a position you don't agree with is something you study or hear. It can help sharpen your own
Yeah.
position onto why you actually think what you think, and potentially make you actually better educated on understanding why someone might take that path. So I don't know where you want to go down or what path you want to take here pertaining to it, but Israel only has different forms of, its origins, if you will, come out of Rivers of Eden and Donald Hockner, like the main two guys who started this whole thing out. And they were inspired by some of the thought of Christian identity. There was some
Yeah.
inspiration there, at least, but they
Yeah.
just coupled it with full preterism. So they kind of
Yeah.
married these theological
Those
ideas
two
with Christian,
together.
yeah,
Yeah.
which
Well,
led them.
you have the Hebrew Israelites, so even if it's not the IO
Yep,
preterists, and it's a movement. You have a substantial amount of people who are believing that filter of the Gentile argument.
right.
And yeah, like you said, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's
You're
you
good.
when you marry those two together, you have that hybrid.
Yep.
And I think that that's interesting. But I focus on the conclusive arguments. That's what impacted me the most.
Right.
And when I used that in debates with the full preterists, I immediately removed that filter with the Gentile. I even brought up the First Corinthians 7 with the spouses. And I've even challenged other many versions of Israel only with that, of the unbelieving spouses that, okay, they're scattered all throughout the world for hundreds of years. Who are they marrying and having sexual affairs with? Those were true non-Israelites that they were marrying and
Yeah.
having sexual and producing children. So when the gospel finally reaches them, then what about their married spouses? Are they
Right.
included in the covenant? That makes perfect sense why Paul is addressing them. And you've even had some of them saying, well, it's for a special occasion, or it's still not it's not the primary theme of the narrative, so to speak. But
Yeah.
I like to see where I could find weaknesses in the arguments. But in my opinion, I think that if you're going to be a full preterist, and I remember, Derek, I remember last year before we connected, you made a post on the preterist perspectives. You said, "Are there full preterism leads to IO or failed prophecy?" You said, "Are there any full preterists that have had this experience?" I remember you made a post, just a
Hmm.
small little post on that. And this is right when I got into the Facebook group, and I saw that post, and I was thinking, well, does it lead to those two? And when you look at the history of full preterism, it does lead people to either one of those two. The majority maybe failed prophecy or back to futurist Christianity. They
Yeah.
they go
Yeah.
back to Christianity. They say, "Oh wait, Christ couldn't have came, so I'm going to go ahead and put my faith in the waiting club for 2,000 years, waiting for Christ to return." So I think that pretty much wraps it up. If what I wanted to touch on it, because that has been my journey, Derek. And we're in the same Facebook group. We've seen a substantial amount of people go through that same journey.
Right.
They say full preterism, it's going to lead to covenant creationism, it's going to lead to IO, but then it leads to myth vision. And I'm telling you, that was my journey. If it wasn't for full preterism, I don't even think I'd even know Mythvision. But when I started seeing your content and I saw metaphoric language, I started seeing how, you were hosting debates with Don. That's when I started delving into more of your content. And it was the myth view. Once I started seeing this is myth, that was the aha. That was the highlight.
Yeah.
Myth, failed prophecy, that is what I hang my hat on. And so, that's why I'm grateful for full preterism, because to me, full preterism, it leads people right to your channel, in my humble opinion. It leads people right to that myth vision. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so I'm thankful to be a part of it. I should get a tattoo of it, Derek. I
Ah,
really
you're
should.
funny.
If I do, I'm going to send you a picture.
Yeah, no,
That's
I
fun.
think we talked about this earlier with reinterpreting words, or you find ways you almost like discover secret meanings when you're a full preterist. And it's okay, because 99.9% of the church is wrong. They've been wrong
Yeah.
since 70 AD. When you have a position that is taking texts, by the way, that are still being developed after 70 AD, they're not even fully developed. They're still being written. I think most of them are being written after 70 AD that we find in our canon. And it's literally being championed by Christian individuals who are reading them, not only identifying themselves in this material, right? Very early on, they find that this is speaking about them, but then also they're waiting. They're expecting something to happen in the future. Some are interpreting it in a Gnostic sense, like we talked about the Gospel of Thomas. There are groups of Gnostic type Christians who are saying these things are spiritual and they've already happened. You literally get that in like Gospel of John pretty heavily. I just say it's easy once the whole world is against you as a Christian and you see Jesus's time statements and you're like, the church that's still waiting, like you're waiting in contrary to the very man himself that is the chief figure here who's saying it's supposed to have happened back here. It's like if your dad gave you and I instructions and you and I are waiting, and then we have kids who are waiting, and these are like sacred instructions, right? And their kids are waiting, and their kids are waiting, and some of them go, no, it's already happened inside of us or something, and you're like, well, these guys are a little strange over here, but most people are sitting here waiting. You can identify with the people who say that it already happened inside, but just if you call yourself a Gnostic and just say it's intergnosis and all that kind of stuff. Or you could be like what we ended up doing, which was saying the whole church was wrong all along and we figured out the secret answers. Well, this is kind of what covenant creation has done. Covenant creation goes back in, it evaluates language like the flood of Noah, where waters are coming in and destroying animals. And then it takes stuff like the book of Daniel or Ezekiel or other places where it describes nations, which is usually always corporate in the Old Testament. It's rare that you have individuals identified with animals. Nations will be a bear or an eagle or a lion or different animals, right? So they merge these two genres. They're both apocalyptic in a way. The flood is a cataclysmic event, but they say the waters, which are always the nations, went to flood in the ark. The ark which Noah built was actually the ark of the temple. So listen to how they reinterpret the flood of Noah, which we know is inspired from earlier actual flood myths. Like these are real boats with real animals, with humans who are surviving for humanity. Like this is the way to read this text. I mean, you can have fun and read it however the hell you want. And that's literally what covenant creation does, is they find a way to go, actually, Noah's ark is the Holy of Holies in the temple. And he's like the high priest, right? The animals that he brings in are nations of people who join him inside of the temple. But the waters are the wild, non-believing nations that are coming to attack. Like, bro, you just took a flood myth and made it mean whatever the hell you want it to mean at this point, because you can change and bend words. You can make words mean whatever you want. And I feel like you kind of get that with Genesis, with Adam and Eve, and the genealogy that you see with Io. The way that they're interpreting this is Adam is not the first human. And the continuity of that genealogy, it plays out. Whoever the redactor is that, pieced this material together that we have called Genesis, You got Adam is the first human, the same way we'd have first human myths in Greece or any other first human myths that we find across the world. And the genealogy literally says Adam begat so and so and so and so and so, all the way to the 70 nations that get described as Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then out of one of the chosen, and I think it's Japheth, not Ham, because Ham is Canaan, Japheth or Shem, maybe it's Shem, Abraham is born. And so out of Abraham, you just had a list of 70 nations. Now you have Abraham literally right after that, who will be the father of many nations, and in him all the nations will be blessed. Well, what nations? Only the nations that are his descendants.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, what about the ones he just descended from? What about the 70 nations they just talked about in the previous chapter? So we have our disagreements, and we're not going to see eye to eye on this and the way that they interpret the entire text. But you brought up something else too that I was thinking of was the idea of the Gentiles, the non-Israelites, right? You do have, even in the older Bible, the Torah, you have implications of people who are not, that can actually join, and they're not considered Israelites, but their descendant, the first generation or the second generation, is then equated as an Israelite. Rabbis in the Mishnah, Talmud, the Tosefta, they were all wrestling and debating these issues, and they were saying the reverse. So you can lose it, right? If you go out and you become scattered, when the Assyrian armies scattered them among the nations, after a generation or two of mingling with non-Israelites, you literally become non-Israelites. You're not, there's no like, oh, I'm maintaining my kosher and my Torah observance. No, dude, you literally have become assimilated, and you can reverse that role even in the Hebrew Bible, even though it's a little stricter. Later rabbis lift oftentimes or find ways in the interpretation of their scripture, which isn't necessarily what the scripture says, but sometimes it does imply that you can reverse that. You can join, your son or your children's children will become Israelite, like through this assimilation process. So I guess what I'm getting at is that there's this exclusivity for those who don't know what Israel only is, that only descendants of Abraham in the literal bloodline, I always say from the nutsack of Abraham, literally, are welcome to join in covenant or join and become one with the children of God. And what's interesting about that is when you get to the New Testament, you do get this dichotomy between two groups, the nations and Israel, the nations and Jews. And it uses Jew and Israel interchangeably. They are synonymous often. In Romans 9, they're synonymous. You have Israel, which are the Jews, which he cried about at the beginning of Romans 9:5, talking about, I wish I was cut off from my kinsmen according to the flesh. He wishes that it was, that his Jewish brethren, the Israelites, were accepting his gospel, but they're not. And then there's a dichotomy about incorporating the Gentiles and that contrast with Israel. Or Acts 13, verses 16 and 26, I think it is. And in that section, he contrasts children of Abraham and the God-fearers. They're two different groups. Well, why are God-fearers with the children of Abraham? If only the children of Abraham are allowed in the Christian cult, there'd be no reason to have a new group or an attached group called God-fearers. It makes no sense to me. And it makes perfect sense historically when you understand that non-Israelites went to synagogue and their names are on inscriptions, and proselytes who would join the communities literally they believed in the God of Israel. They came to accept these things. The same way Jews under Hellenistic rule completely Hellenized. They literally forsook the God of Israel and started worshiping foreign gods. The reverse is possible, and the same is possible in becoming an Israelite or joining the Jewish groups. Rabbis disputed this, though. And I have actually a quote, if we want to bring it up.
Yeah, let's bring it up.
Cattell Berthelot, in her book, Jews, let me just show you here. This chapter that she had, can you see this?
Let me put it up right now.
Okay. I've asked people to read this years and years ago, man, in the groups, because I was debating and all, and it was all like, was kind of dick measuring contest, and I feel like there were falling out. Honestly, there was falling outs, and there's still a little like, hey, I want to be right. We're guys. You know how it is. And I think it's important to understand that this is not Jewish. This is not a Christian or faux Christian, as the often term is used, idea. This is not only something Paul does, which Christianity adopts. This is a Jewish idea of bringing in non-Israelites into the fold and telling them that they're children of Abraham. Non-Israelites joining in covenant and becoming children of Abraham. This is not a Christian only thing. I'm trying to find the chapter here. Did I pass it? Maybe it's up here. Forgive me, bro. Hold on one second.
Yeah, really quickly, Derek, how is my connection on this? Can you see me clearly? Is everything fine?
I see you. You look fine on mine.
Okay, because I just realized right now I'm on a I'm not on Firefox, which really does well with StreamYard, and I just realized like, oh my goodness, I'm not on Firefox. I'm on another one. So sometimes I get a lag. I get a lag in the discourse. But yeah, thank you. Just
you probably are lagging, and it doesn't, because you're not talking. It's probably not affecting the viewership. Okay, here we are. This is it. So in this chapter, you could see that clear. Beyond citizenship, the enduring significance of lineage and legal fiction of adoption, converts as children of Abraham, in Y. Bikurim, a legal fiction related to the Roman notion and practice of adoption. In this, there's a quote. I was reading it earlier, just in case we were going to discuss a little bit of this, because it might be worth someone who's interested in understanding what's going on here. Okay, here it is. So in the section of Jerusalem Talmud that discusses the Bikurim, I think I'm saying that right, 1:4, we encounter a revolutionary approach to this issue. Now, the issue above that he goes into is literally, bro, and it's going to sound fast, but let me put it this way. If you're a convert, you want to join Judaism and become part of the nation of Israel. By the way, that means you adopt their laws, their Torah. Judaism is totally in relation to Torah in Jewish thought. Okay. Ask Jonathan Adler and academics about this. To become a Jew means to adopt the law, to participate in their legal national identity. Okay. To do so, you need a mother. If you want to call yourself an actual Jew, you need a mother who's a Jew, which would mean you have a maternal lineage. Well, some of the rabbis thought, you need a mother who's a Jew. Other rabbis thought, no, it needs to be patrilineal. So if your dad was a pagan and your mom was a Jew, then your mom having that child, you're a pagan. You're not an actual Jew. It's your children that you have that will become citizens, that are like full-blown Jews. And so they couldn't say the prayer of Deuteronomy 26, verse 3, which is the God of our fathers. So that in private and public spaces, they could pray saying, the God of your fathers, meaning those who are really Jews, Israelites, or the God of their fathers. You can't say the God of ours, because Abraham's not your father. This is in rabbinic writings, okay? So the rabbis, here's one of the sayings. It was taught on Tanaitic authority in the name of Ar Yehuda. So I looked up this rabbi. This is early 2nd century. It's like right there, okay? The convert himself brings the first fruits and recites the declaration prescribed in Deuteronomy 26:3. What is the reason? Meaning the scriptural basis for this ruling? No longer, remember, they're not allowed to read this. The convert is not allowed to read this. So what is the reason? No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. By the 1st century, 2nd century, they're not dealing with nations in the most, they're not talking about nations in a corporate sense. Individuals are nations. Paul uses the term for the ethne, ta ethne. Nations are individuals who are not Israelites, who are not, they're not Jews, they're not Israelites. And in this, he's saying you can, because he says, in the past, you are a father to Aram, but from now on, you are a father to all nations, goyim, Jews call those who are not Jews, who aren't Israelites, goyim. They don't call other Israelites goyim. This is just a common language. So this is not a Christian source. Arya Yahashua B. Levi said, the law, halakha, accords with Ar Yehuda, meaning his interpretation is correct. A case from before Ar Abahu, he rendered a decision in accordance with the position of Ar Yehuda. I just wanted to show you one example. And her book, by the way, goes through so much of this. The problem was this. Jews had a law, the Torah. The Torah has some things in it that, they think were good. And then some things that are just backwards and old that aren't good in Jewish thought. Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, all these different Jews had different ways and methods on how they were trying to get the Roman world to see the Jewish religion as not only sacred and ancient, but better. And so they were competing. Jews had a law. Rome has a law. And in Roman law, citizens who are not Roman could become Roman citizens. They were pretty universal about incorporating citizenship to anyone and everyone. Pretty good about it. Now, it wasn't like flip a coin. Sometimes you'd be lucky in a certain city and they might give people in the city citizenship. Other times they gave access to them through, if you were a slave, you could earn your freedom and citizenship by serving for 20 years in the army. And so there were different ways, but they had laws, and Greeks who wrote about the Roman law during that transition phase between the Greeks and Ptolemaic Empire into the Roman era would write that Rome is going to be the greatest nation that ever existed. Remember, Israel is a nation. They think of nation, national identity. So there's laws that are competing under the Roman Empire. And the Romans were the best at saying, you can become a citizen. You can actually go so much as saying, I will adopt you. If you weren't my son, I will adopt you and you'll be more important than my bloodline. So a lot of adopted sons literally became emperors.
Wow.
To them becomes the adoptions of sons, sonship, right?
Yeah,
Paul uses this same idea of adoption in his letters. And she documents all of this in the book to highlight adoption is a fictive kinship. If you look back at all the gods of history, oftentimes they are related to their people biologically in the myth, genealogically in the myth. You go back, Mars was the father of Romulus. Mars was in the ancestry. The gods were literally the ancient fathers. But where's Yahweh? He isn't, according to Jewish tradition, he is not their actual patrilineal ancient ancestor.
Wow.
I think there are clues in the Bible, in the clues of like the stories. There's hints that Yahweh impregnates these women, like instead of the men, like even with Eve, it says that she says, with Yahweh, I've begot a son. Now you can interpret that however you want, but there are other places where he opens their womb. And there are strange occurrences like Samson, with the birth of Samson and the myth of the strong man Samson. His mother's in a field and meets the angel of the Lord. Well, she goes and gets her husband and says, the angel of the Lord came. He goes, what did he tell you? Josephus is hilarious when he comments about it. It says, you can tell that he was jealous. Like he knew something went down in the field. So he goes and he asks the angel, when the angel finally comes, he goes, what'd you say to my wife? And the angel says, it's none of your business. And he's like, huh? Like, what? And then he's like, well, what's your name? He goes, I don't need to tell you my name. And he says, your son, he's a Nazirite vow. You do not let him drink any wine. Don't cut his hair. Well, scholars point out that this sounds like whoever the redactor is kind of trying to paint over that the angel of the Lord impregnated Samson's mom. Anywho, the gods are genealogically tied. Well, if your God isn't genealogically tied, you have to be adopted into the family of Yahweh. So Israel is adopted, is this idea. That means anyone who's not genealogically tied to God, in the mind of Paul, can be adopted. I know I'm rabbit trailing here, bro, but this is
no, you're not rabbit trailing. It's important.
This is such a long, very deep, extremely complex situation here for a lot of people who might be in it, and I can already hear the resistance from IO because it's been tense from the beginning of trying to explain these things, right? The point is, not everyone agreed with the same interpretations, bro. You and I
Right.
could read Ezra right now, and Ezra says, keep your seed holy. Well, what does that mean? That means don't intermarry with women from these nations, and it lists the nations. Therefore, the whole Bible, anywhere you read anything that has to do with Jews, you must read Ezra and you must abide by what Ezra says, right? Nah,
Yeah.
no, nope. Jews they're not monolithic. They did not have one single interpretation. They did not
Yeah.
agree. And in fact, if anyone debates anyone more than anyone, it's Jews. Jews debate. That's how they literally they debate Torah today. Like that's what they do. They endlessly debate and don't agree on how to interpret certain things. So I say that to say, you get to Paul, and you're seeing someone who's incorporating philosophy from the Greco-Roman world. He incorporates the language that is prevalent in the Greco-Roman world when it is discussing people who are beyond. The concept of the nations over against Jews is lifted from the concept of Greeks and barbarians. So you have us, and then you have everyone else. The barbarians, they're named that from like when they heard them speak, they said bar, 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 bar.
Yeah.
And this is what the
Yeah.
old myth says. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
true, but they were called barbarians. And they
That's in
were,
the history books, so it
yeah,
must be true, right?
must be true. But I
Yeah.
guess it's important that we understand like this thing was quickly and right out the gate accepted by people who were not Israelites. Why?
That's a
This is
great question.
the most important question, I think, is to
Yeah.
say, why would I, Mr. Joe Derrick in the 2nd century, reading Greek? I know Greek better than any English speaker today who's ever studied Greek. I know Greek better than them. And I'm reading these texts, but my identity finds no introduction. This has nothing to do with me. And I'm finding a book that I'm adopting. And it's so radically wild to me because I see not only Christian movements do it, but Jewish movements are doing it. So it's
Yeah.
not a Christian idea. It is a Jewish idea to bring in non-Israelites and incorporate them into your laws, into your communities, to participate and become one in the family. Now, different rabbis had different interpretations. So
Yeah.
I think Paul was much more, while he was an apocalypticist, I think he was much more encompassing because he's looking at prophecies that are talking about nations that are beyond just Israel. There are passages he's talking about Israel, Romans 9 with Hosea.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in Romans 10, I'll make the last comment and let's take questions because I know there's so much here I could say. Romans 10, verse 20 and 21, or 19 and 20. Let me pull it up. And Romans 15. Talk about Romans 19, Romans 10, 19. Again, I asked, did Israel not understand first Moses says? And then he quotes Moses from the Old Testament. I will make you envious by those who are not a nation. I will make you angry by a nation that has no understanding. He's speaking about non-Israelite nations because Moses is talking to Israel. All of Israel's there with Moses. There's no dispersion. There is no scattered. Moses is there with all 12 tribes. He's saying, I'm going to make all of you, because you stubborn, hard-hearted in the wilderness, you're not obedient, you're not keeping God's laws. I'm going to make another foreign nation. You're going to be envious of them, which means in the original context, this was not an Israelite nation. So if Paul quotes this to apply to his nations, if we're doing the hermeneutic that I hear Io do, which is Romans chapter 9, quotes Hosea about Israel being divorced and not a people, therefore they must be Israelites, then Romans 10 contradicts it because he literally equates them with the nation that's going to cause Israel to envy. And at the end of the whole thing in Romans 9 through 11, he says, in the end, once the full number of the Gentiles comes in, then all Israel will be saved. My interpretation, go back to Romans 9:5, his Jewish brethren who are Israel, who are not accepting his message, this is Israel. This is what he thinks. He thinks the stumbling block will be taken away once God has pulled in the nations, and then all Israel, all the Jews will then accept the gospel. That's how I understand it, and it's a critical scholarly position as well. So there's so much more we could say about Revelation and the
Sure.
144,000. We could talk about Matthew with the only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. We could talk about John, where will you go? To those Greeks among the dispersion and the interpretations that go among that. We can go into the book of Acts. We could go like everywhere there's stuff
Yeah.
going on, Tristan, that we
Yeah.
can
And
talk
we
about.
can go on for hours and hours on it. It's like
Yeah,
an endless genealogy, so to speak. You can just continue going on. But
absolutely.
I appreciate your critiques. on full preterism, on Israel only, because those two doctrines, they did affect our lives and our journey.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a journey, and so I
I
think
want to
that
say thank you to them real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to say,
sure,
look, I had animosity, we had tension, we actually squashed it not long ago, and I'm like, dude, I really think everyone, if we actually didn't have this beef going on and all that kind of stuff through the internet, social media sucks. Uh, we learn a lot from each other. Even
yeah,
if we're like wrestling it out, we learn a lot from each other. And at the end of the day, I'm actually thankful because I'm a competitive guy by nature. And
yeah,
bro, when I had that tension, you think I would have read a book talking about Rabbi Yehuda and R. Makash? You think I care to read all that? No. I read it because there was this motivating competition factor of going, they're saying I'm an idiot. They think I'm wrong. Let me go check. Let me see how wrong they are. And I'm like, it inspired me to read and learn. But at the end of the day, dude, what are we fighting about? An ancient, text that I don't know. It to me, it just seemed a little ridiculous. At the end of the day, I'm like, Derek, dude, you spent 5 years like going at it. Like, what the heck's the point? What'd you
yeah.
do? I learned a lot, but it's like, I don't know, man.
Well,
You
you've definitely given, both of those teachings, a platform, it just goes to show how genuine you are, that you're willing to give. These are a small amount of people who are believing full preterism and IO, and for you to give them that platform, for you to even host a debate with Don, Mark Smith, and Richard Carrier, you've given full preterism that historical elevation, and I'm grateful for it. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to sponsor the debate with Richard Carrier.
Yeah.
And to me, it just speaks volumes on your sincerity for
Thank you.
truth. There's a quote right here. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He looks like he's a monk, but he had stated this: in true dialogue, both sides are willing to change. His name is Tich Han. In true dialogue, both sides are willing to change. And to me, that is always my approach. I'm willing to change. I don't know what motives people have, but my motive is, hey, if I'm wrong, I have no problem saying I'm wrong. It's a journey. I haven't
Yeah.
authored any books or anything. But hey, I've been wrong many times before. I used to be a Christian, I used to be an apostolic Christian. I used to be part of what humanity would label as a cult. Okay. So saying, "Hey, I've been wrong," it's a good thing in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
And it's my motive to take an honest approach and critique full preterism. And I just want to thank you, Derek, publicly
I
for
appreciate it.
for hosting this upcoming debate with me and Don. I plan it to be entertaining. I plan it to be something historical. By historical, I mean I'm going to give a historical blueprint on how to debunk full preterism. I have seen full preterists debate. And when I step up, I truly believe that I bring something that is refreshing and something new. And that's how I gain the noise that I have in the
Yeah.
preterist community. I have Donnie Badinsky. He's the host of Standing for Truth platform. It's a pretty respectable debating platform. Dr. Ken Hovind is on there. He's even had Don on there. And a few other, scholars that have been on there and debated, and he enjoys when I debate full preterists, and he wants to continue having me on. Christians have enjoyed my critiques, and those who were former full preterists, they've enjoyed my critiques. Just in the past couple years or so, and so I just want to thank you, Derek, because to me you are absolutely humble and sincere in your approach. And
Appreciate
I
it.
feel that kinship, and it's a journey, But let me see here. Let's get to some
Yeah.
questions. I can probably go all the way back. I know we're pushing the 2 hour mark. And I
I'm
know you're
chilling, man. I'm here with you, bro. Like I this is well, we could do this again, of course, down the road too, more in depth of different ideas, but I'm here hanging out with you. So whatever questions, let's take them and have some fun.
cool. All right. Let me see here. I think we touched on this one right here with Jacob Kilburn. He says, "Why on earth does it matter if it's the or not? What does truth matter? Why does anything matter or have value? What is truth? What is the standard we have to?" And I did touch on this. I did see this one. It look, when it comes to like what is truth, why do humanity value truth? What is it about the truth that we value? These are questions that the greatest philosophers, even theologians, have tried to tackle this. All I can say is that I'm trying to be sincere in my approach,
Yeah.
and I think that's all that we could ask for anybody who opposes us. Let's just be sincere and be willing to change. I think that's very healthy. We have Dr. Steve Cox. You know who he is. He goes a little far back. How did Jesus drink wine with the apostles in the Father's kingdom? This must have been way back. You guys, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and repost them, because I can go and try to scroll down through these comments. Let me see here. Oh, here's Michael Karras. I had a debate with him, and I've had some podcasts with him. He even John Preston gave him a shout out.
Really?
Yeah, John Preston gave him a shout out. Said he was really intelligent. Uh, I had him on my podcast. He was critiquing IO. That was the reason why he was on the podcast. The title is called "Is IO Trash Theology?" He goes, "Hey Tristan and Derek, does Derek know Michael Bradley has now abandoned Israel only ethnic?" Only is now accepted non-Israelite strangers and proselyte as part of Israel's covenant and redemption of Christ. I don't know that. All I know is I've been trying to get a debate with Michael Bradley for quite some time,
Is
to
that
talk about.
true? Is
I don't know, but
Bro, if
that's what he
that's
said.
true, I'll be blown away. I mean, we
I'd
fought
be blown
about this
away
for
too.
5 years, dude. Like for those who are watching from Mythvision side, by the way, be sure to subscribe to Tristan. I pinned his YouTube channel at the top of the chat. Go subscribe to him so you can watch anytime he ever has lives. He's mainly into these theological and philosophical views out of the full preterist camp. So if you're enjoying this, go find him. He does this way more than I do. Okay. That's honestly, you're my brother, bro. You need to get the attention here. I really think so. Because you're
Thank
doing
you,
the
man. I
work. I'm not
appreciate it.
doing this. I stay out of it because it was so personal for me for so long, bro.
Yeah,
5
yeah,
years. I mean, I'm so close to the fire, you're gonna get burnt, right?
yeah,
But me and him, we dude, for years, you just can't. Maybe personalities played a role too. We're alphas, we're kind of, but I could not see. I literally have said probably on record, they will never change. They will never recognize this. I thought there's no way because I didn't believe it's even possible at this point. We fought so hard. Maybe I just left them alone. Maybe after a while, when you stop pressuring and people come to their own conclusions, they can change their minds and kind of come to a different perspective. I don't know.
yeah.
But for me, I'm like, dude, I really didn't see that day ever coming personally.
Well, I mean, like I said, him and I, we clash heads. You've seen some of the posts that him and I have
Yeah.
had, but that just comes to the nature of it. I mean, I treat others with respect, but when people challenge or take it to that level, I try to meet them at that level as well. But like I
I have
said
to
it
back
before,
off because it's too.
I know, I get it. I've lost sleep. I remember, yeah, I was saying like there was like months time, even in like my exchanges back and forth with Dawn. I'm over here in California. So when a post is happening, it could be like 8 o'clock in the morning for them. It's 5 o'clock in the morning over here. Sometimes I'll wake up and I'll go to the restroom and I'll go, do not check Facebook. Go back to sleep, get the couple hours of sleep that you need. Don't check your Facebook notifications. And what do? I just say, well, let's see. And before you know it, I'm missing out on sleep. I'm tired. I'm groggy throughout the day. So it was months where I'm like, man, I'm losing out on sleep over this.
Mm,
But this is, it is something that I don't take it personal, but at the same side of the same coin, it is personal in the fact that it was personal in my journey. So, I do enjoy these dialogues. I do enjoy the sport of debating. All it takes is just that one sentence or that one moment where somebody can remember and say, I remember when this person brought up that point and I saw the reaction. I saw they couldn't answer, or I saw that they struggled. And that reaction is what. So to me, I enjoy it. and
yeah.
and there are people who say that it's not beneficial. I try to get just that one moment. If I can get that one moment in to prove a point, hey, look, we have debating in politics, right? When two presidential elects happen, they have a debate. People want to see these thoughts and ideas exchange. Richard Carrier, we know he's a debater. A few others. Well, let me ask you.
Yeah.
What is the future of Mythvision? I already know you're going to hit 1 million subscribers, Derek.
Yeah. I
It's only a
mean,
matter of time. Where do you see Mythvision 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road? What are the goals?
clearly yearly get together conferences or something. I also want to start putting tours together to ancient sites. So
Wow.
hopefully the war can settle down in some of these areas like
Oh
Israel.
yeah.
But Greece, I want to go and actually see some of these ancient places because I've expanded beyond just Bible. I like to learn the ancient classical Greek world. I would love to go into Turkey and check out ancient, you know, and if things ever calm down and things get great, it'd be cool to go visit some of the ancient like Mesopotamian sites and stuff. But yeah, that's like future vision, but also yearly conference or something to get together. I'd like that. And I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, other than producing the educational content where I'm at right now, what I might do differently. You know, who knows? Who knows? I might sharpen my skill to do debates professionally, of course, but there's so much poop throwing, bro. I don't know if I
There it
care
is.
to deal with the like, it's rhetoric. It's most of the time, it's not about, like you just quoted, a monk. If
Yeah.
that were the case, bro, I'd have those every day.
Yeah.
But it's you,
Yeah.
to find the right interlocker to do that you can disagree with, but professionally and respectfully, and they care.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of conversations I prefer.
Yeah, I mean, to each his own. I prefer open discussion rather than a
Yeah,
debate because a debate you're just it's like a straitjacket. You're timed, even with the open dialogue, you're still timed, and I prefer an open discussion. We got somebody who subscribed to my channel. She always says some very kind words. Team Tristan present. Derek, can I pour you some wine, your light lunch, and maybe a massage and a nightcap afterwards? Okay, that's so phenomenal. It looks like we have some.
that's my OnlyFans. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, goodness. I love it. I love it. Well, anyone in the chat, if you guys have any questions or comments, some kind comments, please, by all means, go ahead and share them. The topic today was essentially full preterism. You know what, Derek? I did ask this in the beginning. If I can get um, your opinion, where does the future of full preterism, 10 years, 20 years down the road? I mean, you've made history for full preterism. Who's going to carry on Don's mantle? Many thought that it was Daniel Rogers. All right, but now I see that Daniel Rogers. We don't know. We don't know. Where do you see full preterism down the road?
I mean, I cannot know for sure, bro. I mean, they're under fire in a way they haven't been before. I don't think they've ever experienced this much tidal wave of people within the community. Like, they've had the Sam Frosts, right? They've done a little bit of fighting that's gone on, but they just went back to futurism. So I don't know if their scalpel cuts as deep, because now they're just coming up with a different way of interpreting the time statements. And whereas, like, there's a huge movement of people who are realizing, what is this literature, this collection we
Mm,
call the Bible? What is this material? They're looking at it in a way you're not supposed to, usually, in a
mm,
lot of these more conservative Christian
yeah,
churches. So I don't know. I mean, because again, I mentioned cognitive dissonance. They hit a wall. They might double down and go deeper into something. Someone might come along and they might just be such the charismatic character with all the right attributes and popularize it on a level that makes this movement look nothing. I doubt it, but you never know.
it's gonna take a charismatic person. What made full preterism gain my respect was the debating realm. The fact
Yeah.
that Don was willing to debate. I was supposed to be having a debate next week, by the way, with Don's friend Holger Neubauer, a 2-night debate in his church. And I just felt that once Don accepted the debate, to be quite honest with you, and I told Holger this, I just want to focus my attention on Don.
Yeah.
He wanted me to pay for my flight and my hotel to go down over there. And I just thought, man, I'm
Huh.
not paying over $1,000. Yeah, that's really what it was for me. If he had paid for my flight and my hotel, I'd be there next week, but he wanted me to pay for it. So I'm like, nah, never mind. We could always hop on a podcast. Holger, if you're listening, which I doubt you are, we could always have a podcast discussion. We know Caleb, he's in our
Yeah.
Facebook group. He says, I've been in and out, but if y'all haven't already touched on it, can y'all touch on the one mind theory or concept when it comes to interpreting the Bible and how you think that affects IO? By one mind, I think he's referring to like the Bible being authored by one mind, like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
one continuum. We did touch on this, Caleb. And like
I,
I like to state, it's a different author for these books that we read, the 27 books in the canon, even the Old Testament, a different author, a different time with a different motive, different mind. That's how I like to look at this. You can't just put it all together like a fundamental conservative Christian. You just can't do that. That's all
yeah.
inspired by the Holy Spirit. You have to look at this like you would any other religious literature. It's just funny that special pleading. And with my debate with Dr. Sam Frost, he used the Holy Spirit right in the very beginning. I started developing some questions when I was looking at your content, listening to Richard Miller and a few
Mhm.
others. And you when you ask certain questions, the Christian has to use the Holy Spirit or faith to
Yeah.
interpret the Bible the way that they do. And that's just something that's completely unacceptable. Can't use the Holy Spirit and faith in a judiciary court hearing. You can't do any of that in a
Yeah.
fair, circumspect public scrutiny. You just can't do that.
Well, take
Anybody?
take the idea. So specifically, the question that Caleb had relates to IO and full preterism. It's a systematic approach, right? The one mind idea is that it's all unified. It's one narrative. It's one story, and it interprets itself. I think of like Isaiah. By the way, there's 3 different Isaiahs in Isaiah, at least. Scholars have identified 3 sections. There's Isaiah, or the oldest version they think that's in there. There's a second Isaiah, and then there's third Trio Isaiah. But
Yeah,
these prophets are under different circumstances, talking about, it depends on the circumstance. So if they're dealing with a nation that's cruel and harsh, they're often talking about the near destruction of this empire, this conquering nation that has them under their power. And in some
yeah,
cases, when they're nice to them, like Persia, they have a positive view of the non-Israelite
yeah,
nations. So
yeah,
you get these like 2 prophetic schemes, like in the end, the nations will come in and they will recognize the beauty of Israel and they will be accepting. And then in
yeah,
another
yeah.
one, it's like the nations will be ruled with an iron fist and we will crush them and they will
Ah,
be destroyed. And it's like,
yeah,
and this is
yes,
explained, and Paula Frederickson talks about this in her book called Paul the Pagan's Apostle. And she's actually talking about the identity of the Gentiles, which is why I always say, if you want to hear critical scholarship on why the Gentiles are not Israelites, listen to what she says in her book about Paul's usage of scripture and how he can pull these different views from different texts to create his own theology. So he systematizes these prophets and uses them for his own current church, his
yeah,
own ecclesia, his own
yep,
gathering of believers. And he comes up with his own theology pertaining to these ideas and kind of tries to harmonize them by showing the negative, destructive expectations and then showing the positive and going, okay, you know what that means? That means that those who accept Christ's gospel, they're going to be saved in the end and they're going to be there with the Jews and they're going to be part of the family of God. But the ones who aren't accepting, that was prophesied that they're going to be destroyed and they're going to be, in the end, completely crushed. So he found a way to systematize. And so I can't blame Christians for doing the very thing that the authors of the New Testament are attempting to do. They're just picking up
yeah,
the candle. The candle's already
yeah,
burnt. They're just getting the candle handed down to them and picking up a tradition that's already been going on for a long time. So,
yeah, yeah. Very nice. Anybody else? If you guys have any questions or input,
do you see
you
my
know,
chat on your side?
I'm right now. I'm on a chat, and I do see. Yeah, I see.
Do you see super chats?
Yeah, I saw a super chat right now. He says, "Hey, Derek." Oh, let me see it right here.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's more than just that one. But okay, let's take this one.
Yeah, there was another one. It was about some guy was over here talking about Islam. Allah is your creator. I'll put it on there in a sec. I
Yeah,
saw
yeah.
that. Yeah, he says, "Hey Derek, Jeff Briggs. Hope you and the family are doing well. Congrats on your channel. Looks like it took off. Miss talking to you, bro. Have a great day."
Let's talk
Yes,
sometime, Jeff. It's been too long. So, do you know Jeff?
Jeff Briggs. I don't believe we
Yeah.
met.
This is before you showed up on the scene in the groups. Me and Jeff
Okay.
used to talk all the time, bro. Like things
Yeah. Okay.
happen, life happens, bro. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying?
Sure.
But Jeff was always cool with me and we had some deep conversations. Bro, I used to talk to so many people who were persuaded of IO, for example, and we had great friendly conversations for years. I had
Wow.
friends with all sorts of people, man. Um,
Wow.
some of us fell off. Some of us, just stopped staying in contact and whatnot. But Jeff, yeah, man. I don't know if you're able to reach out to me or you still got my number or whatnot, but text me, dude.
Cool. Let's go to this next one. I thought this was pretty humorous, but since the $10 was paid, let's go ahead
Yeah.
and honor it. Allah is your creator. His throne is at Mecca. He has many names. His name before Allah was Baal. He is an angel. he is from the Andromeda star system. He is the god of, it
Jupiter.
looks like, is that Saturn, Jupiter?
It might be,
The
yeah, one of 'em.
the Israelis are his chosen ones. All right.
Thank you for the super chat.
Yes. Goodness. I think that's it for the super chats. I don't
There was
see.
another one up there. Wait a minute, what? Dude, we've all just been wholly ghosted, someone wrote
Yeah,
at
I
the
saw that
beginning.
one. Yeah.
Okay, and then Daniel Whitaker, thank you for the being a member. But yeah, so no other chats, huh? No other questions, nothing?
I guess not, you know. But you know what, Derek? Like, I want to say once again, I'm really looking forward to this debate coming up with Dawn. You know, I plan to give a
So,
blueprint for anybody and everyone in every walk of life to utterly debunk this doctrine. Um, and I truly believe that it's going to be an entertaining, it's going to be healthy. And I respect Don Preston, you know this. And I want him to leave the debate feeling good. But I do have a mission, you know, and the mission is to expose the fallacies like no one has ever done before, you know. So again, I want to publicly thank you, Derek, for hosting this debate. And I'm doing it for humanity. I'm doing it for the future generations. And my motives are absolutely pure. And you know, I was born and raised in this. You know, I've given my entire life over to this, just like you. And full preterism has been very influential. I've read over 20 books from Don Preston, and I know his theology in and out. I know what Dr. Richard Carrier debated on. He only had a couple books, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
about just maybe 3 months preparation. But this is something that I'm ready to go today. I could rock and roll today. You know, I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, and I highly respect Don and his willingness and just giving me this opportunity. And I just want to say publicly, thank you, Derek.
Of course,
Like
bro.
I said, before, I'm in this for the future generations. I'm in this for the benefit of humanity, and I respect the doctrine of full preterism. But at the end of the day, I do believe that it is erroneous. I do believe that it is fallacious, and I'm just here to have a wonderful, entertaining debate. And I'm hoping that everybody can enjoy it. So thank you, Derek.
Yeah,
I
dude.
greatly appreciate
Of
you.
course. Of course, bro. Look, you don't even have to. You always do this, man. It makes me want to blush. I feel bad. I'm like, ah, he's gonna say so many nice things about me. No. um, no, dude, we're brothers. And you know, you're on fire for this. We've had a lot of deep conversations about this. You've made me think about things that I didn't think about, right? So I look forward to hearing the debate, hosting it. I'm going to be as neutral. And if the only time I'm going to interject, bro, that I could see happening is if it gets bad, out of hand.
Yeah,
And I don't think it's going to. I
it
think you
won't.
guys are
It
both,
won't.
you respect Don. I know that you've had your little scuffles. I know that you've, had your back and forths with him. But I do know that you do respect him at the end of the day. I mean, look, I think the same thing about futurism, though. I think not. I get why people are futurists. I get why people are full preterists. And I'm trying to say in all of this discussion that there's a little bit of truth on both sides, but both are wrong, in my view. Both are wrong and mistaken.
Yep.
But then at the end of the day, where do we go from here, Tristan? So here's the point where I'm at right now, right? You hit a wall and you go, okay, so what? Let's just say pretend that you're not persuaded there's a God. Let's just say, I don't know what your ontology, like philosophically, might be or whatever. But let's just say that that's the case is we discovered that humans evolved and that there's no deity. Where do we go from here? Do we forsake everything? Do we just go, well, I don't believe it because there's problems with it? And I've been thinking about this a lot. And I'm like, we're narrative creatures. We're social animals. And it's important that we have some kind of narrative, I think, internal narrative for ourselves. So I'm trying my best to understand how do we as humans who may be skeptical, who may not buy or believe that Jesus is the one or God is real or anything like that, still, find a narrative that makes sense and that, allows people to understand that we're human too. We don't act like we're robots. Oh, just now when you gave me that speech, there was nothing but placebo that hit and the atoms that connected. If we're just talking lingo about descriptive scientific terms, that's not how we live our lives. We live our lives going, yo, Tristan, hey, how you doing, bro? How's your family, man? We're wanting to know more. We want to talk in story form. And so
Yeah.
I don't want it to be the end that, aha, I don't believe that this is true.
Right.
Okay. Now what? Now what? That's
Yeah.
it? Or do
Yeah.
we find a way to take the myths and spin them for ourselves, but not in the literal sense? We don't want to dupe people to think Heracles really wandered the earth and did 12 labors. We don't want you to think a guy walked on water and floated up into the clouds. We want you to understand it maybe metaphorically, but we also understand wanting to destroy the problem of evil. And so
Sure.
we want the literal and we want the metaphor. How can we do this without, how do you negotiate these things, Tristan?
Yeah.
You see, the
Yeah.
futurists want that problem of evil. They're hoping one day it gets fixed, but a lot of times don't do anything about it because God will do it for them. Jesus is going to do it for them. What can they do right now to help prevent that? Right? That's
Yeah.
the action on someone who says, this is my house. Let me try and clean it up because this is all I got. Not, oh, Jesus is going to come and clean the house up. If humans can get to that place, that would be great, bro. But I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here, man, as someone who's hit a wall and went, okay, cool. It's not true. That's where I'm at. But now what?
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the concepts from the golden rule, love yourself, love your neighbor. You know what I mean? I think that still applies. I think you live your life as morally and ethically as possible. You do good to yourself, provide for your family, and look out for humanity. I really highly respect Bertrand Russell's view
Yeah.
on ethics. And looking at judiciary theory, political theory. We are developing our morals and our ethics. That's why my channel is called 21st Century Mind. I want to have that mind in the 21st century that is going to benefit humanity. If we get to the 22nd, 23rd century, however how long humanity continues, I'm just hoping that we get to live a life of peace, tranquility, joy, and happiness.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can get to the place, Derek, where there's no more wars. And I'm just
That-
speaking. I'm
That's
speaking out
what the
loud here.
ancient prophets literally said, the plowshare, and
Yeah,
they will
yeah,
turn their weapons into shovels and
yeah,
not weapons of warfare, which
yeah,
is an ideal thing. And it's weird that a prophet would say one day that war is going to end, and the very end of all things is a massive war. And there's nothing
yeah,
but wars. There's 70 AD, and then 50 years later in Bar Kokhba, and another even nastier war. So,
yeah,
like, oh, this is going to be the worst in all human history. It says, and never a day has ever been this bad, and never since then. That's BS. World
yeah.
War II outdid 70 AD, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not just talking about
Oh
Holocaust.
yeah,
I'm talking all of it. And so,
yeah,
the idea that this is the heavens and the earth, or some new heavens and new earth, bro, the words lose meaning. They have no meaning. There'll be no more tears, no more suffering, no more darkness.
yeah.
Well, they mean nothing now. To me, you've literally milked out all of the meaning of those words, what they actually mean, by making them not mean what they actually mean. And that's scary when when you can reinterpret words to mean that kind of stuff. Like, it's just, to me, it's a little scary.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, that's one of the problems and the main critiques of full preterism is spiritualizing the language. We just want to honor the super chat here. Michael Anderson, John 10:16 helps against the IO argument. Let me see,
Hmm.
John 10:16. Are you looking that up?
Yeah, pull it up. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there should be one flock, one shepherd. I I already know what they would say.
Yeah,
The other
I know.
sheep are the 10
Yeah,
northern tribes, or depends on whose interpretation. They're also lost Israelites. They would just, I'm just telling you, Michael, what they would do is just interpret that as another flock of Israel, because sheep are always identified as Israel according to the IO position. If you go to Matthew 10:5 and Matthew, the other place too, in Matthew, where it talks about go rather only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So Israel is identified as sheep. Then they will run to the Phoenician, the Syrophoenician woman, or the Canaanite woman, depending which gospel you go to that identifies her differently, that she's called a dog. And then you have Paul talk about dogs, wild beasts in Ephesus, wild dogs in Ephesus or something. Yeah, so they would just say, sorry, Israelites are sheep. So anytime you see the word sheep, you know what they are. They're Israel. And then if you see the word dog, you could just equate that with a non-Israelite of some sort. And so, but even she in that story, it's very interesting. While it definitely isn't the prettiest picture, even she eats from the table. And Jesus does grant her for her faith. So
Yeah.
while I know what they're doing and I get it, it's like not the prettiest picture to paint a Syrophoenician or Canaanite woman in and saying, well, you're a dog from the Lord, which is like, whoa, dude, what the hell? She still is granted based on her faith. She's still blessed. She's still given. And so, I definitely have a totally different spin. But then Jesus' mission was only to Jews during his life, which he calls Israel, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The Great Commission in Matthew doesn't happen until he's dead, till after Jesus is gone. There is no go into the nations till he's gone. So it's only to Israel.
Right.
Once he's gone, then you have that Pauline mission of the Goyim or the ethnic.
Right.
So
Right.
It's an interesting perspectives, putting on these lenses and considering different angles,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we covered a lot of topics. I think that this was one of the most beneficial topics in full preterist history, this conversation, in my opinion, especially coming from you and all your experience. I just want to thank you, Derek, because I like to serve the preterist community in our Facebook group, with these discussions, and anybody who is in that preterist community, those voices, former full preterists, those who have, the low profile podcast, whatever, they've benefited from, our efforts in this group. And like I said before, you and I are both sincere in our approach, and you've been very beneficial to my life, and I'm just starstruck. I remember when you sent me a DM last year, when you saw that I was debating for the IO preterist against the full preterist, and you said, "Hey, you like to talk to me?" I thought, this is Derek Lambert reaching out to me.
You're funny.
I had been watching his stuff. I never in my imagination did I ever think that this would ever happen. And then all of a sudden, I'm debating Sam Frost, Jen Fishburne. I'm talking to her, and a few others. We got, Daniel Rogers and Jason DaCosta last week. And it's like,
That was,
yeah,
I
yeah,
still need to watch that, but that was awesome that you made something like that happen. And bro, please don't put me on no pedestal. Like I'm just a dude like you. We are brothers, and I'm telling you, you're flattering, but please, bro, you're my bro, and I'm a little embarrassed by the constant, gratifications, dude. Like, look,
I'm telling you, it's true.
I really do appreciate the kind words, bro. But like for real, you're awesome. I saw that when we talked. I thought you were going to be a typical uphill battle pertaining to IO stuff when we talked, and then we really, really reasoned. We were on the phone for 3 hours, and I was like, oh, okay. So I wanted you to understand my angle. We got to talking, and then you explained your position, and it's been history ever since, bro. This is the beginning, unless you back out after the debate with Don, because you've been wanting that debate for a long time, and you told me like, I may just stop this altogether because this is like an obsession, so to speak, of yours.
I mean, we'll see after Dawn. I mean, that to me, that was it's a chapter. That's how I look at it. I mean, I feel that I feel that I can give him a great debate. And he's a good sport. He wants the challenge. I feel like deep inside of him, he's going to enjoy this challenge. I'm not David Hester. I'm not Sam Frost. I'm not Chris Date or any of the other people that he's debated. I was an arduous fan of his. I suffered persecution from my personal life. My pastors, my mentors, all deemed me as a heretic. Left the United Pentecostal Church because of full preterism. My father didn't speak to me for over a year when I told him that I was a full preterist, and my father was a former pastor. My grandfather, former pastor. So it is something that hits home to me. And I'm somebody who's studious in this doctrine, and yeah, like I said before, I'm in it to be a good sport. You know what I mean? That's what I'm in it for. And, I enjoy these topics. I eat, sleep, and breathe it. I even have, tattoos of certain phrases. I got, sensus plenior right here on my bicep. You know what I mean? It's a hermeneutical phrase. I just got the other day full body all over. I got skeptic right here on my bicep. Got
Oh,
skeptic
wow.
here. Yeah, I got a few others. Yeah, and I might even get 70 AD somewhere on my. I might even get it. Just because
Put it on your
that
ass cheek,
phrase.
bro. Just put it on
Yeah,
your ass.
not I won't. Not that. But those phrases, might even get full preterism. I am going to get dancing in the streets, that is for sure. But
Yeah, you
certain
have to.
phrases, yeah, I have to. I have to. It that to me,
And you
when
also need to have a tattoo. My goodness gracious.
my
You have to have
where's this
my
coming from? I didn't even realize I said
you
it. I
say
didn't
it
even realize I
so
was saying
much. Now you haven't done it in this stream. I've been waiting. I'm sitting there the whole time and my good no, you might have said it once. My goodness
Maybe,
gracious.
maybe,
My
maybe.
goodness gracious. You do that.
Oh man. Well,
Yeah, bro.
thank you, Derek.
Can you
Well,
hit
look,
these diamond encrusted just to show some love for his super chats? Even though I know you're probably like, huh? Up above, there was one above. I don't like to leave anyone hanging, even if you
oh yeah,
disagree.
sure. I agree. Baal is Jin. He is a wish master.
There's also above that. There's several above
Baal
that.
is Zeus.
Yep,
All right, Baal is Zeus. Baal created you in his lab spaceship in 70
is
miles.
70 miles. So this sounds like the UFO stuff I was telling you about earlier. Diamond encrusted Abdullah above too. There's another one. There's one above Michael Anderson's.
Okay, let me see. There's one above Michael Anderson's. We got to that
Yeah,
John 10. Wait,
there's a.
so okay.
It's above that one, so you got to keep scrolling up. It's a $5 one. Yep.
Allah means moon god in Arabic, you fool. The moon is artificial. He is an extraterrestrial. All right.
Yep. And then the last is
All right.
CIA under direct control of Hubal. So the end is tomorrow, Diamond Encrusted Abdullah, at 12 p.m. noon Eastern Standard Time. When it doesn't end, because it's supposed to be over, we will have a different interpretation and it will just be something new. And I'm considering you for a top priest in the cult if you're down.
Hey,
Anyway,
yeah, speaking of cult, I had this gentleman on my podcast a couple of days ago. He believed that his mentor was the second coming of Christ or Jesus incarnate. I don't know if you saw the highlight I posted. Well, yeah,
no,
he believes that his mentor was or is the Michael that's prophesied in Daniel, and that he is the second incarnate Christ. So it was myself. His name was Dallas, Lily Marie, and Lance Conley. We all got on there. I like to have the open mic discussions, invite anybody in the Facebook group to come on. He wanted to come on, and he was pressing me for like a good like month,
to
and not
come
just
on.
me, but a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people were. He was talking to a lot of people in the Facebook group, and so I asked him this question, Derek. I said, okay, so he's the second incarnate Christ. He said, yes, I truly believe it. I go, okay, has he ever sinned? And he didn't want to answer it. It's like, we all know in the New Testament, it teaches that Jesus was sinless and he never sinned. So if your mentor is the second incarnate Christ, has he ever sinned since he's been born? And he didn't want to answer it. He's, I'm not answering it. And to me, that speaks volumes. But speaking of cult, I just got to my,
That's
you
so
know,
funny.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like Christopher Hitchens stated, like, religion can make morally normal people do and say ridiculous things. And so,
Yeah.
you know, what can I say? But look, we're hitting the 2 hour mark, Derek. I
Yeah.
think this pretty much wraps it up. Everybody that has been faithful in the chat group who've been on, thank you for your attention. These are very, very beneficial topics. If you enjoy theology, you enjoy critical scholarship, and those of you that are in the full preterist community, those of you in the Facebook group, just thank you for your involvement. And I'm looking forward to what the future holds, and just seeing more great content, more great events. And yeah, Derek, if you plan to have any tours, to go visit any sites throughout the world, please count me in. That would be absolutely amazing. And Mythvision podcast is a legendary podcast, as we know, and it's going to reach if it hasn't reached the world yet, it's going to reach the world. And so I'm excited to what the future holds for Mythvision.
Thank you.
And I truly believe, your best days are ahead of you. And hopefully, man, we get to see you on, I don't know, man, maybe Joe Rogan's podcast or something like that.
That'd be
It'd be
cool.
great. Be great,
Yeah.
man. I mean, because you're
I haven't
definitely out.
seen anyone on his platform that has ever gone down the myth route, like into the weeds, like I would love to.
Yeah,
That would be really cool.
you're that leading voice.
Yeah,
You're
bro.
that leading voice. Religion is King Ghidorah. Okay, religion is King Ghidorah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. But anyways, we'll go ahead and wrap it up, you guys. Thank you so very much, everyone, for your attention, and please be on the lookout for future content for Mythvision. And anybody here who's listening, if you would like to subscribe to my channel, by all means, go ahead. If you would like to use my channel to debate, or if you'd like for me to host a debate or a discussion, shoot me an email. It's in the description. And I'm pretty faithful at getting back eventually. So, thank
Yeah,
you, everyone.
please let me do a shout out here for you, bro,
Okay.
because Tristan, if you watched the debate with Richard Carrier against the full preterist Don Preston, who was like a mentor figure in my life too, just like Tristan's, Tristan made that happen. That cost big bucks to make happen. And I really, my channel, I try to focus on like scholarly stuff and occasional debate, but it's like mostly I'm doing these polished videos and stuff. But Tristan's trying to have a platform where you can come on yourself and have a debate discussion. You don't have to be a PhD, as long as you're decent. You're not like doing crazy stuff there. I imagine Tristan will be cool. And I don't know what you would want to debate, but email him. And if you're interested in doing an episode or a discussion, he does discussions, not just debates. Like if you're someone who left Christianity or you were in the full preterist circles or whatever. I just watched you do, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw that you were interviewing someone who was an ex-full preterist as well. Reach
Yeah.
out to Tristan. Subscribe to his YouTube channel if you're coming from Mythvision. Show him some love. He's a brother of mine, and he's really made me think in ways that I don't usually think. And I was like, man, I'm glad you mentioned it that way. I never thought of it that way. A lot of deep thoughts. So, Tristan, thank you for interviewing, man.
Thank you, Derek. And like I said before, I say this all the time on my podcast. If you're in the 21st century and you have a mind, my channel is called 21st Century Mind. So if you're in the 21st century, you have a mind, my platform is your platform. So if you have any thoughts and ideas, you like to utilize my platform for an open live discussion, doesn't matter where you're at, like to have a debate, by all means, shoot me an email. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you,
Myth
bro.
Vision Podcast, you're a legend, man. And I just want to thank you personally, like I do so many times. But I know that you are definitely benefiting present humanity and future humanity. So thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much. Everyone else, thank you for your attention. We are signing off, and we will see you again in the future.